Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
Not long ago, I was living with my two friends. I had been single for several years and wasn't even dating at the time. Both of my friends had serious girlfriends, which usually made me feel worse about being the only one without a significant other. One weekend, both couples went away for the weekend and I was alone at the house. Usually it didn't bother me that much, but for some reason, this weekend I was really sad about being single. I was depressed and low and was feeling trapped in my head. I decided to do the one thing that made me happy at the time, and that was eat an entire buffalo chicken wing pizza. My plan for Saturday night was to eat my grief and sorrows away. I ordered my pizza, and 40 minutes later there was a knock at the door. When I went to grab my pizza, I was instantly annoyed. The delivery driver was one of my roommate's friends. Well, friend is a strong word. He was a semi-decent acquaintance of my roommate, and I don't actually know what his real name is. Everybody just called him Z. He was that sketchy guy that every friend group knows. He always showed up at parties with questionable people around him, and he was always in trouble with the cops for something. This guy had a brush with the law for just about everything you can think of on a minor scale. Z was smiling when I opened the door, but the smile faded away when he saw that it was me. He asked if my roommate was home so he could say what's up, and I explained to him that he was out of town and it was just me for the weekend. Z nodded a little bit at the front door, and he tried making some small talk with me, but I was very dismissive and kind of short with him. While he was talking, I noticed that he was looking past me, into the house. It was a very weird interaction, but then again, Z is a weird guy, so I didn't think much about it. I rudely said bye and just shut the door on him. I wasn't in the best mode to begin with. I didn't like Z, and more than anything else in the world, I just wanted to eat my pizza. I eventually ate the entire pizza and spent several hours playing my Xbox. A little after 1 in the morning, I thought I heard a noise coming from outside of the house. I was in my bedroom, which was on the driveway side of the house, and I thought that I could hear the sound of movement or shuffling coming from outside. I looked out the window and I didn't see anything. I assumed it was my mind just messing with me since I wasn't in a great head state. I tried getting back into my game, but after I heard the noise, I just had that nasty pit in my stomach, and it wasn't from the pizza. It was just the feeling that something wasn't right. I went into the kitchen to get something to drink, and I could hear noises coming from the back of the house now. This time, I knew it wasn't my mind. I could clearly hear movement and shuffling coming from the backyard. I gingerly walked to the back of the house, which is where my one roommate's bedroom is located. His door was closed, but I felt like I could hear something behind it. I put my ear to the door and it was clear as day. Something was going on in that room, and I knew my roommate wasn't home. I opened the door, and like a deer in headlights, Z and I assumed his girlfriend were trying to, and nearly successfully, breaking into my roommate's bedroom window. I yelled at him, called him out, and Z, who at this point has completely crawled through the window, was putting his hand up in a defensive position and telling me to calm down. Z looked calm, but the girl he was with looked like a ghost. Z tried telling me that my roommate said it was okay for them to stop by. They were just trying to borrow a DVD. When I asked him why he didn't use the front door, he said that he didn't want to bother me. All while this conversation was happening, Z seemed to be inching closer to me, and his lady friend was slowly moving behind me. I didn't like what was happening, so as Z inched closer to me, I started to inch closer to the door. I looked up at one point and I saw him slowly reach behind his back, and that's when I turned around to run for the door, and the girl was standing in the doorway. Without thinking, I pushed her down and ran to my bedroom. I slammed the door, and Z started pounding on it. He was pleading with me that he was just there to borrow some stuff, all the while violently pounding on my door. I shouted that I called the police and that they would be here any minute. I didn't actually call the police by that point, but I just wanted to see his reaction. He started to curse at me under his breath, and then the pounding stopped. A few seconds later, I saw out of the window him and the girl running down the street. Even though it was late, I called my roommate and asked if he told Z it was okay to borrow some DVDs. My roommate was confused and said that he absolutely did not tell Z that he could borrow anything, and that's when I called the police. It wasn't long after the police apprehended Z for attempted break-in, and that night messed me up. I can't go to sleep now unless I check and make sure every door and window is locked, and as for Z, I'm not really sure what happened to him. After that night, he stopped coming around, and I never saw him at parties again. My roommate finally cut ties with him. I'm still terrified that one night he'll come back for me since I was the one who ratted him out to the police. I can only hope that he doesn't hold a grudge, and I really don't feel very good about that.
I was looking everywhere, but I was unable to find her. God knows where she had gone. After looking almost an entire day, I started to feel worried about Maria. Maria and I had recently gotten married, and we were here in Los Angeles for a honeymoon trip. I met Maria a year ago when I was visiting the Philippines, and I instantly fell in love with her. She was the sweetest, kindest, and most unique girl I know, and as I got to know her, I fell more for her. She had the most beautiful eyes, which were shaped like almonds. She was wearing a knee-length skirt with a knitted shirt, and her curves were showing in the right places, giving her a well-defined body. Her voice was as soft as if she was playing a melody while talking. Slowly, we both fell in love with each other. I stayed there for about a year just to be closer to her, and then we decided to get married. It's been only a few days since we got married, and we came to Los Angeles for a honeymoon trip, but as soon as we got married, I started to notice changes in her behavior. It started to feel like she was a completely different person. When we were having romantic moments, she would space out, and sometimes it would feel like she was trying to recognize me. One day when I woke up, I found that she was not there. I called her, but she did not respond. And when even after 2 days she did not return, I started to lose my mind because I was unable to imagine her not being there with me. All kinds of scenarios started to cross my mind. I thought, what if she ran away from me? But she came willingly with me after marrying, and she looked so happy that we would be together forever. So what could have happened? Did someone abduct her? But she slept right beside me. I would have noticed if someone had broken into our room. All these thoughts were taking over my mind, and I started to lose my senses. The last conclusion I came up with was that she had run away from me because of her changed behavior patterns that I had noticed after our marriage. I guess she did not love me enough to imagine the rest of her life with me. I did not want to go back because I was still hoping that she would come back to me. So I rented an apartment there and started to look for her on my own. I lost my appetite completely and started to feel dizzy throughout the day. But then I thought, if something were to happen to me, and then she returns, what will happen to her? So I decided to eat something. That was when I saw a Domino's pizza outlet on the side of the street. I went in and ordered a veg-loaded pizza and sat in an empty seat on the corner. As I was waiting, I heard a familiar melodious voice that I could recognize anywhere. I looked around impatiently and noticed that she was there wearing the employee uniform and talking with a customer. I immediately went near her and said, "Maria, what are you doing here?" She looked at me with a look that broke my heart. It was the look of unfamiliarity, as if she was oblivious to my existence till now. "I'm sorry, sir, but who are you, and how do you know my name?" she asked with innocence in her look, as if it was our very first time meeting. I would have fallen in love with her all over again, but this time, it was just shattering my heart into pieces. I was her husband, and she was refusing to recognize me. And it did not look like she was doing it on purpose, because I could read her expression and her eyes that she really could not remember me. I decided to win my wife back and make her remember us at every cost. So at the time, I said that maybe I just mistook her for someone else. I ordered the largest pizza on the menu and sat there looking at her for hours. She was like an angel, and I wanted her back in my arms. I hated how other men were looking at her and were trying to make advances toward her, but I felt relieved by noticing her cold responses toward them. I came again the next day and spent most of my time there ordering pizzas and just staring at her. She noticed me and came closer. "Sir, is there something wrong? Why do you keep looking at me?" she asked me with an innocent voice. I wanted to tell her it was because she was my wife and I wanted to take her away that moment. But I held my inner thoughts and said, "It's just because you are so beautiful, miss, like a delicate flower which people would want to protect." She blushed as I said that and turned her face away. She smiled lightly and returned to work. I felt like I was reliving those moments when we first fell in love, so I decided to do the same and make her fall in love again. So I started to come to Domino's Pizza every day and would look at her work for hours. She started to have small talks with me, and I could not help but notice her being flustered around me, which made me feel a bit relieved. Slowly, our small talk turned into long conversations, and we started to hang out. One day I asked her out, and we started to date. I was too eager to make her my wife again, so within 3 weeks of our relationship, I proposed to her. She was blushing through her ears like the first time when she said yes to me, and we decided to get married right there in Los Angeles. As soon as our marriage ceremony ended, I decided to take her home. We flew from Los Angeles to New York and finally reached our home. The thing that was making me more nervous was that her behavior was starting to change just like before. I was always scared and was always aware of her presence, and if she left my side even for a minute, I started to feel anxious. I couldn't even sleep properly, and one day, it happened. She was gone once again. I could not understand what was happening, so the first thing I did while looking for her was that I contacted every good doctor to know about her condition, but they all told me different things and that they needed to see the patient to know the exact cause. After looking for days, I went to a bar to drink, and when I was drinking, I could not stop my tears from flowing. That was when a woman came and asked me what had happened. I was so drunk that I told her everything. She held my hands and then released them in a sudden response. "The love of your life is cursed. Someone had put her in a loop that triggers her as soon as she gets married. You need to get away from her life if you want to break this loop. Stop looking for her." She started to leave after saying these things. I called out multiple times, but she didn't turn back and left. "Who are you calling, sir?" the man serving the drinks asked me. "The lady who was just sitting here beside me." As I said this, the man looked at me with disbelief and said, "Sorry, sir, but no one was here. You've been drinking alone for almost an hour and a half." I was surprised and frightened by what he had just said, and that's when I remembered what she said about my wife. I exited the bar and went to my apartment. "What's your order, sir?" she said, looking at me standing near the counter. She was wearing the uniform of Domino's Pizza and was smiling at me politely in an official manner. After looking for her in every Domino's Pizza outlet possible, I finally found her again. I guess that woman was right. She's stuck in a loop, and I loved her too much to let her stay alone. So I decided to live in this loop with her, together.
My name's Ali. I'm 23 and I'm from East Lothian here in Scotland. I've been a fan of the channel for a while now, so I know this probably doesn't qualify as your typical scary story, but it's something that's been bothering me for a long time, and if it scares me, then I'm pretty sure it'll scare your viewers too. 3.5 years ago, a lad that I went to school with murdered his grandparents. It happened on Boxing Day of 2021, and it was all over the news the next morning that this lovely old couple had been found stabbed to death in their own home. Police said that they'd arrested the person that had done it, but for the first few days, they didn't release any details on who they were. Then, once they were sure that they were going to charge the person with murder, the police announced who it was: their own grandson. As you can probably imagine, everyone was absolutely gobsmacked when they found out, but what we wanted to know was why. Why kill your own grandparents in such a horrible way on the day after Christmas, too? We had to wait ages for the hearing and all, but there were loads of rumors flying around about why he'd killed them. I think most people thought that it was like a mental illness thing. So when the hearing kicked off and the lad's lawyers told the court that he heard voices telling him to kill his nan and granddad, there was this collective thing of, told you so. I understand why people would choose to believe that too. I mean, why else would someone kill two people that love and care for them? This lad was living with them at the time, and they were looking after him too, properly, and they weren't abusive or anything. So he had to be mental to do something so horrible, right? But no one knew him thought that, though. At least no one I knew anyway, because, in actual fact, the guy had always been like that. At school, everyone called him James, or Jay for short, and even back then he was a proper weirdo. And I don't mean a little bit of a weirdo, like lovably weird. I mean he was a complete arsehole. He was a bit of a goth, loved his rock music, obsessed over horror films, but none of the other goths in our school would hang around with him because he was a total dick. I'm sure the school had a name for whatever condition he had, antisocial behavior disorder or something, but to us, he was just an arsehole. Some of my mates grew up with dyslexia, autism, ADHD, you name it. But they were sound guys, that lovable kind of weird. Whereas Jay was just an arrogant prick with a bad case of main character syndrome. The last I heard of Jay, he changed his name from James to Vincent. And people wondered why for a bit until someone worked out that it was because he was obsessed with some vampire film that had a character with that name. And that was Jay in a nutshell, really. He thought he was better than he really was, when, really, he was just a sad act. We thought that's all he was, too. A total dickhead, but a fairly harmless one. And then he went and murdered his own bloody grandparents and proved us all wrong. I actually did start to believe that Jay had gone just mental because we started hearing all this stuff about how he was hearing voices and that he didn't really remember killing his nana and granddad and just sort of came to after it happened. You see, he actually handed himself into the police after he'd done it, went right down to the police station and told them everything. So to me, it sort of did seem like he'd had a mad psychotic episode then felt terrible afterwards. But then we all heard something about how the thing that caused Jay to snap was an argument over a Christmas hamper. Someone had sent Jay's grandparents a load of wine and cheese or whatever, or maybe a few of those miniature whiskey samplers. Either way, there was alcohol involved, and Jay decided that he wanted it all for himself. He very selfishly F's off to his bedroom with the booze, and then up the stairs comes Granddad to tell him to give it back. An argument ensued, nasty words were exchanged, but then Jay's solution was to grab a kitchen knife and stab both of his grandparents so deep that there were knife marks on their bones. Jay's lawyers obviously managed to weave in the whole story about him being a schizophrenic, and I read that some doctor agreed that he wasn't fit to stand trial. He never went to prison. He's in some mental institution now, but I think that's exactly what he wanted. I don't give a monkey's toss what some doctor has to say about it, because anyone who knew him knows that Jay has always been like that. If he didn't get his way, he threw a fit, which is basically why he had no friends in school. I also think Jay's behavioral problems are why he ended up living with his grandparents in the first place. He turned 18, his parents told him to get his act together or get out of their house, and the grandparents stepped in to take care of him. All that considered, I think it makes what he did to them extra terrible. They gave him a chance, and he returned the favor by stabbing them both to death, on freaking Boxing Day of all days. I don't think he's sorry either. I think he regrets killing them because he has to face the consequences of his actions, but that's all he's sorry for. First thing he did after killing his grandparents was to think, how can I spin this to make me look as good as possible, which was exactly the same kind of thing he did in school. Not long ago, me and a few pals went to a local boozer for a few pints on Boxing Day, and I ended up bumping into one of the goths that I used to hang around with in school. We swapped a wee bit of small talk at first, the sort of how you been, what you been up to. But then after we gotten a few drinks in us, the subject of Weirdo J came up, and he ended up telling me what happened to make his little friend group exclude him, and by the time he'd finished, I was practically picking my jaw up off the floor. They'd been hanging around with Jay just after school kicked out, walking through the school car park to where the bus stop for school pickups used to be. He said Jay picked up a rock, then just hurled it through the car window of a teacher he'd clashed with that day. They were all like, "What the bloody hell do you think you're doing, you rage?" And then everyone legs it, but then the next day, they all get dragged up to the head teacher's office where there's a police officer waiting for them. The whole thing had been partially caught on camera, so the teachers knew roughly who it was. They just needed to figure out exactly who did it and why. The goth lads, once they were told it had been caught on camera, owned up to the fact that they'd been there when the window was smashed, but they also told the truth when they said that it was Jay's fault and that he'd done it out of the blue. One second, they're just walking along having a bit of crack, and the next, Jay's lashing a stone through the car's window. All four goth lads said the same thing, but then when it came time to question Jay about it, he gave an excuse that sounds frighteningly familiar. He told the head, and the Bobby who was with him, that it was the four goth lads that had bullied him into doing it. According to Jay, the lads that he was with had threatened him with a good old-fashioned kicking if he didn't smash the window, so to save himself a hiding, he did as they told him. And that was Jay all over. Nothing was ever his fault. There was always someone else to blame. Every situation he entered himself into was unfair, and folks conspired against him no matter where he went or what he did. But then, I'm sure you're asking by now, why didn't Jay get expelled for smashing a teacher's car window? Well, word was that he put on such a good show that the teachers didn't know who to believe. So rather than go ahead and press charges against him or exclude him from school, Jay ended up with a week's suspension, and then he was allowed to come back. But then the other goth lads got the same punishment too. He obviously stopped hanging around with those goth boys, but it wasn't because they were bullying him. It was because he couldn't manipulate and control them. To me, I see exact parallels between what happened with that car window and what happened with his grandparents. He learned from a very early age that it's possible to manipulate the system, even though you've done something wrong. The lad that I bumped into at the pub said that, after the whole window smashing incident, Jay had personally told him that he was untouchable. He used that exact word too, untouchable. They never hung around with him again after that, having secured the title of the most arrogant prick they'd ever had the displeasure of coming across. But Jay didn't just stay some arrogant gobshite. He got worse and worse, until in the end, when he learned that he couldn't manipulate his grandparents anymore, he just killed them. If he'd just gone to prison for 30, 40 years, it wouldn't bother me so much, and I 100% wouldn't be writing this. But an absolute psychopath of the cringiest order has managed to game the system and basically get away with murder. Instead of living the rest of his life in a vulnerable prisoners unit, because blokes are rightfully kicking the crap out of him for killing two lovely old dears who wanted nothing more than to look after their wayward grandson, Jay is living out the rest of his life in relative comfort, having completely cheated the system and won. And that scares me more than any ghost story ever could. Has anyone else gone through an addiction to DoorDash and Grubhub? My husband and I went through a phase where we were extremely busy and found ourselves using a delivery service a few times a week. This particular week, I think this was our third time ordering. We just got done with work and it was already 7 p.m. and we just didn't feel like cooking. We usually have good experiences with delivery services. Once in a while, we'll get a crap delivery person who just kind of throws the food around or the occasional canceled order. But on this particular night, my husband and I chose to splurge. We each ordered 3 courses from a pretty pricey restaurant, but also knew that we'd have leftovers for at least a few days. In the hopes that the food would arrive quickly and safely, we put a very large tip on the order. The delivery person, Rachel, seems to be courteous and prompt, letting us know each step of the way until our order arrives. The food arrived perfectly, and Rachel thanked us for the generous tip to let us know that it meant a lot. We were feeling good and getting the food ready and throwing on a movie to have a little at-home date night. We started putting food on our plates and heard a knock at the door. We both kind of looked at each other and then made our way towards the front door. My husband swung open the door and what once was a smiling and bubbly delivery person was now at our door expressionless and white as a ghost. Rachel looks up at us and says softly, "Can I please come in? I think there's someone in my car." My husband, who always assumes the worst, is super protective and says no. He never ever lets strangers inside and has read and seen too many things where a good Samaritan lets someone in their house or helps them on the side of the road and you're just set up for some trap. He has said to me multiple times, as soon as you open the door for a stranger and let them in, it's already too late. After a minute or two of pleading with my husband, he agreed that this tiny girl wasn't a threat and we would let her in and lock the door right after. We motioned for Rachel to come in and we could tell that she was thankful but starting to get a little bit hysterical. We phoned the police and let them know what was going on and asked if they could send someone out. They let us know that they would send someone as soon as they could. And we sat with Rachel and tried to calm her down and let her know that she was safe now. We weren't going to let anyone in the house and the cops would check her car and the surrounding area. I'm sure of it. As we waited for the police, now in a mostly awkward silence, my husband noticed a few of our motion lights beginning to turn on. First, we saw one go off on the side of the house, followed by one going off in the backyard just a few moments later. Trying not to cause any panic, but definitely moving with some speed, my husband was darting around the house, making sure that all the windows and doors were locked. I knew they were because unless I specifically opened them, my husband always keeps everything closed and locked. And after he checked all of the locks, he starts to look through the blinds to see if there was anybody on the property illuminated by the motion lights. My husband thought that he saw something by the trees and bushes towards the northwest corner of our yard. He couldn't make it out, but said it looked like eyes were glowing from one of the openings. He told me to go back into the living room with Rachel and he would keep an eye on things. As I was sitting with Rachel, I heard what sounded like nails on a chalkboard, or the only other way to describe it is someone going down a water slide with no water, the kind of dry screeching sound that you might hear there. I went to tell my husband, but he was already hot on the trail, feeling like he had heard tapping on the windows in the dining room. My husband went to the windows where I thought that I had heard the noise coming from and lunged back. He said that he saw a set of eyes pressed up against the glass. Thankfully, the next sound we heard and the image we saw were the flashing lights and sirens of police cars. The police arrive and search the inside and outside of our house thoroughly. They let us know no one is inside and also no one is inside Rachel's car, even though both of her back doors were completely wide open. Just as they were about to finish the search, they found someone lying underneath our back deck, trying to hide. The officers corral him back down to the ground and get cuffs on him to bring him back to the squad car. We then have to give additional statements and go through some information before they let Rachel know that they will have someone follow her home and escort her into her house. The main officer at the scene also let us know that he would leave someone outside patrolling for at least an hour and we could request it to be longer if we felt uncomfortable. We were all understandably shaken up by the ordeal and just wanted it to come to an end. My husband and I ended up eating a few bites of our dinner and went to bed shortly after. I don't think I got a minute of sleep that night, though. I felt like our privacy and safety were violated, and also felt so bad for poor Rachel, who I'm sure also had a sleepless night. I'm glad everyone was okay, including the police officers, that nothing more violent or sinister happened that night. And it's safe to say, if we order out, we just go pick up the food now and haven't used a food delivery service app since.
I was sitting alone at a corner table in Starbucks, sipping on a hot cup of coffee. I felt really sad because I had recently broken up with my girlfriend. The noise of the coffee machines and people talking around me just made me more aware of the pain in my heart. The smell of the coffee reminded me of the tough time I was going through. We had a big fight, and it made me realize that ending the relationship was the right thing to do, even though it was a hard decision. The tension had been building up for a while, and tonight it reached a point where I knew I needed some time alone to heal. My name's Jake, and I used to love my girlfriend a lot. However, I didn't know that our relationship would eventually break because of her mistake. I still love her, but I understand that I can't go back to that relationship. She's the kind of girl who just wants attention, and she's quite possessive too. I believe breaking up with her was the right decision to make. I was just thinking about this when a girl came up to me, but I was lost in my thoughts and didn't notice her coming until she suddenly slapped me across the face, making everyone around us gasp. It was my ex-girlfriend, looking furious and hurt. The unexpected scene surprised the Starbucks staff, causing them to stop what they were doing. "Why did you break up with me, Jake?" she asked angrily, her voice standing out in the noisy cafe. I touched my cheek, feeling both the physical and emotional pain. "We had our reasons," I said, trying to stay calm. She scoffed at me, not caring about my answer. "You can't just end things like that. We were supposed to be together." I took a deep breath and admitted, "I found out you were cheating on me," a heavy truth hanging in the air. She widened her eyes, pretending to be innocent. "Cheating? Oh, please, you're just making things up." I shook my head, feeling more frustrated. I wish I was, but I can't be in a relationship without trust. Things got worse as she started yelling and accusing me of not giving her enough time and attention. In her view, my commitment to spending time with friends felt like a betrayal. The cafe filled with awkward silence as people looked at us with sympathy, our drama unfolding in a very public way. In the middle of all the commotion, I spotted a familiar face in the crowd, a friend who had seen our relationship fall apart. Before I could process it all, she raised her hand again, ready to hit me once more, but this time, a strong hand intervened. A security guard had shown up, quickly getting between us. "All right, that's enough. You two need to take this outside," he ordered, his tone serious. We reluctantly went outside, leaving the warmth of Starbucks for the cool night air. The distant sounds of traffic replaced the background noise of the cafe, and the bright overhead lights revealed the tension on both our faces. Once outside, she continued to criticize me, saying I was heartless and didn't care. I listened patiently, knowing it was important to explain my side for closure and understanding. I can't be with someone who breaks my trust, I said, keeping my voice steady. Cheating is something I can't ignore. We both deserve better than a relationship based on lies. For a moment, her eyes softened, but then the anger came back. "You never let me explain why I did what I did." I sighed, trying to ease the tension. We had chances to talk, but it's too late now. We need to move on. As time passed, I noticed a shift in her attitude, the understanding that our breakup had finally started to hit her. I could see the vulnerability beneath her anger, the pain of losing something she had thought would always be there. The Starbucks sign, brightly lit, framed our emotional conversation. The irony wasn't lost on me. This place meant for casual coffee dates now witnessed the messy end of a relationship. The word Starbucks echoed in my mind, a constant reminder of the unexpected turn my evening had taken. Over time, our conversation's intensity started to lessen. Surrounded by city lights, we stood in the chilly night, accepting the truth of our shattered relationship. The security guard, content that we had moved away from the public scene, left us alone. In a final effort to find closure, I spoke gently. I hope you find the happiness you're looking for. We both deserve to be with someone who helps us become better versions of ourselves. Feeling weighed down, I turned and walked away, leaving behind the remains of what used to be. The city sounds became the only background noise as I moved away from Starbucks, the spot where our story reached its end. Thinking about the roller coaster of emotions, I realized how life can surprise us with unexpected turns. The breakup's bitterness, mixed with a lasting taste of Starbucks coffee, created a bittersweet memory that would eventually fade away into the past. Years later, I returned to the same Starbucks where our tough breakup happened. Surprisingly, she was there with a new boyfriend. As she came up to me, I felt a bit nervous, but her unexpected words surprised me. She genuinely apologized, saying sorry for the pain she caused during our breakup. She understood the importance of true love without any mind games. Wishing her real happiness with her new partner, I went back to enjoying my coffee. In that moment, I realized how time had helped us grow and heal. Sipping my coffee, I felt hopeful that one day I'd meet someone with a mature and pure heart to be my other half. The echoes of our past were there, but the future seemed to hold the promise of new beginnings.
So this is going to be a really wild ride, and there's some pretty personal family details in here too, so I'm not naming any names or places to try and keep my anonymity. So basically, a few years back, I found some old photographs of an uncle on my dad's side. They were photos that I was not supposed to find, and the reason behind that was pretty obvious. The only photos I'd ever seen of this uncle, who had moved away when I was much younger, were from when he and my dad were kids or in their early teens. I'd never seen him as an older kid or a grown-up because by that stage, he was very distant with the family and then moved across the country before I was out of kindergarten. Apparently, he came to see me one time when I was a baby, but aside from that, I had no real memories of him, just the old photos my dad let me see. But by that day, I saw the photos that he didn't want me to see, and everything kind of just fell into place. I remember opening up the little envelope, taking out the pictures, and feeling this intense feeling of confusion for a few minutes as I flicked through those pictures. The photos seemed to be taken at a music show of some kind, as I remember thinking, did my dad used to be a punk? Because there was a lot of that kind of style among the people attending the show. But then the more I looked, the more I noticed that 2 or 3 people appeared over and over again. They had closely shaven heads, worn big black boots and denim, and each had a swastika either on their jacket somewhere or tattooed somewhere prominent like their neck, shoulder, or arm. That grabbed my attention all on its own. But the thing that really had me pulling back was the fact that one of these skinheads with that tattoo looked a hell of a lot like my Uncle Alan, the one I hadn't seen since I was a baby. There was actually a moment where I thought one of the other guys might have been my dad, so when I was half freaking out by the time I climbed down from the attic and took the pictures to show Mom, who just kept saying, "I think you need to talk to your father about this," in a way that told me that she knew the whole story but didn't want to be the one to have to tell me. Now anyway, about half an hour later, my father and I are having a massive yelling match, mostly surrounding the fact that he and Mom had chosen to hide something huge from me. But the thing that really made me explode was how he started telling me, "Alan's not a bad guy, you don't understand." Now imagine being me, in that moment, and having your dad tell you that your Nazi uncle isn't a bad guy. I mean, that's the dictionary definition of a bad guy, right? I couldn't understand why Dad would say something so insane when the evidence that his brother was some evil bastard was right there, right in front of him. And the argument got really intense, Things got very emotional, but as much as I tried to get my dad to talk to me about it, to explain why he'd kept things hidden, he just didn't want to talk to me about it at all. And then, after I don't know how long, he burst into tears, and it's the only time I'd ever seen my dad cry. My mom then basically chased me out of the room, telling me, "Give your father and I a minute to talk," and much like my dad crying, I rarely saw my mom get that mad. Seeing Dad cry had already shut me up, but then seeing my mom so furious had me running upstairs when she started to snap at me. Like, I know it was already a tense situation, but seeing Dad cry and seeing Mom get so mad, that's what made me realize that there might have been more to the story than just my uncle being a jerk. I was still angry, but I also felt kind of dumb for not realizing that there was a whole backstory behind my uncle and his especially bad life decisions, and it was one that was very painful for my father to have to remember. I knew it'd be a crazy story. There's no way that it couldn't have been. But when I sat down with Dad and he told me the whole thing from start to finish, I had to pick my jaw up off the floor afterwards. Uncle Alan was just 2 years younger than my dad, and they were best friends growing up. But around the age of 13, my uncle's behavior started to change, and he became my dad's polar opposite in just about every way. He fell in with a bad crowd, a really bad crowd, and the deeper he went down that skinhead rabbit hole, the more he became completely incompatible with any kind of civilized society. Those were basically my dad's words, too. He became a pariah, and soon living in the city got too much for him. You can't exactly walk around with those kinds of tattoos and not get yourself into trouble, I guess, so Uncle Alan started looking for some else place to live, and that's when he heard about some white supremacist militia turned doomsday cult living out in the middle of nowhere. He and Dad were talking around the time he moved away, so Dad doesn't know exactly how it all came about, but Uncle Alan ended up living with these people and basically preparing for the end of the world. Not the end in any biblical sense, but like a helter-skelter style race war that'd end society as we know it. There were all kinds of people out there too, from all walks of life, whole families too, but they were all there because of that one ugly thing that united them: hate. Yet having families meant that there were kids there, a bunch of them, but apparently not everyone had their best interests in mind. Somehow, Uncle Alan discovered that a few of the guys that he'd stayed with were in the process of trying to groom one of the girls that was part of one of the families. I don't know how exactly, but there was some kind of confrontation, and Uncle Alan's worst fears were confirmed. He went straight to the group's leader, but instead of acting on the tip and investigating what was going on, the leader tried to downplay the whole thing and told my uncle that he was just being paranoid. Personally, I think the guy was in on it, but excuse me if I'm kind of biased towards literal Nazis. Anyway, Uncle Alan figures that he was faced with two choices at that point. Number one, do nothing and just allow these racist scumbags to groom a little girl. Or number two, find a way to get those kids as far away as possible and do so by any means necessary. I guess he knew he couldn't prove that the guys were trying to groom the girls, so there was a chance that the cops wouldn't be able to do anything about it. But what they'd be very interested in was all the illegal weapons and bomb-making equipment that they had stashed up there. And so, my Uncle Alan became a snitch. Apparently, he helped the feds sneak up to the place the group was staying, too. If he hadn't, there probably had been another Waco out there in the woods, and all those kids might have been killed in the crossfire. Heck, they might even done like a Jim Jones and killed everyone so the feds couldn't get to them. So I understand why he'd cooperate to the point of actually guiding them in or telling them the secret password or whatever it was. But then after that, when everyone was up on charges, Uncle Alan had to go on the run. He could have turned state's witness, got a whole new identity, but he didn't want to work with the feds any more than he had to, and he didn't want to go running to Uncle Sam to protect him from anyone or anything. And so instead, He pays my dad one last visit and then just disappears. I asked Dad what was said during that last meeting, and apparently it was mostly Uncle Alan explaining what had happened out there in the woods and then apologizing for being away for so long without reaching out in any way. He then apologized again because he had to move far away and never come back, because there were people who wanted him dead, you see. And I guess it was already a risk meeting my dad, and they met somewhere quiet after dark too, so I guess Uncle Alan was really serious about being in danger. After that, Dad never saw or heard from him again, not even so much as a phone call. I don't even know if Uncle Alan came to regret his beliefs or his actions. I hope he did, and in my head I like to imagine that he found some dignity in helping those kids, or at least trying to help them, and that he was able to build himself up from that. But then again, maybe he's still the same guy, and I'd call him a piece of crap to his face if I ever met him, and he still has those disgusting tattoos. But it's just kind of weird to think that a person like that could at least do some small amount of good in the world. Not enough to balance out the hate that he has, but still, better than nothing, I guess.
In a quiet town called Rivertown, in the middle of America, something really scary happened at the local shopping mall. The mall was usually a busy and lively place, but one Monday afternoon, everything changed when there was suddenly a lot of gunfire. This shocked the whole community. The trouble started in a Starbucks cafe, where people usually go to relax and have their favorite coffee drinks. But on this day, everything went wrong. Instead of the usual calm and familiar atmosphere, the sound of a gunshot filled the air, making everyone in the mall scared and surprised. It turned an ordinary day into a really sad and frightening situation. Mary Thompson, a 30-year-old graphic designer, was at the mall sipping her favorite Starbucks drink when the shooting started. Everything became chaotic, and Mary felt stuck, unable to move. She saw a middle-aged man looking tense standing in the terrace area. People around her were panicking as they saw another man fall, a red stain spreading on his chest. Mary was scared, and her hands were shaking as she held onto her coffee cup, trying to understand what was happening. People around Mary were talking in hushed voices and gasping in fear, trying to find a safe place or hiding behind tables. Despite the chaos, Mary felt a strong urge to figure out what was going on. She cautiously walked closer to where the incident occurred, keeping an eye on both the fallen man and the person responsible. Mary approached a scared woman who was huddled in fear, her attention fixed on the Starbucks logo on her cup. Mary asked, "Did you see what happened?" The woman, still trembling, replied, I don't know. Everything was normal, and then suddenly this. It feels like a nightmare. Mary's heart was pounding, but she decided to get closer to the commotion, hoping to find out more about what had happened. A security guard, looking worried, hurried past her toward the scene. Mary asked the guard, "What's going on? Is he okay?" The guard, focused on keeping things under control, replied sharply, "Ma'am, I need you to stay back. The situation is dangerous," urging Mary to move away. Despite being told to stay back, Mary could still hear snippets of conversations from other people nearby. The person who got hurt was a 49-year-old man who had been enjoying his time at the Starbucks terrace when the attacker showed up. The reason for the attack was still unclear, making the whole situation in the mall uncertain and tense. As Mary got closer, she couldn't help but overhear two scared people talking to each other. "I heard he was at Starbucks. Can you believe it? Right here in our town," one person whispered. "Yeah, it's crazy. I never thought something like this could happen here." "What's the world coming to?" the second person replied, showing their disbelief in the quiet conversation. The sound of sirens got louder, indicating that the police were on their way. Police officers quickly came to the area, telling everyone to leave the mall for their own safety. Mary, feeling torn between being scared and curious, stayed near the Starbucks where the tragic event happened. A police officer came up to her looking serious. "Ma'am, we need you to leave the premises immediately. It's not safe here," he instructed. "I just want to know what happened. Was he targeted? Is the person who did this still around?" Mary asked, her concern for her community making her keep asking questions. "We're trying to figure it out. The victim was targeted, but we don't know why. The person who did it is on the run, and we're working to catch them," the officer explained before telling Mary again to leave. Outside the mall, a group of people had gathered, their faces showing a mix of shock and worry. News reporters were everywhere, asking for people who saw what happened. Mary found herself caught up in all the media attention, feeling more uneasy as she talked about what she saw inside Starbucks. "I never thought something like this would happen at our Starbucks, you know. It's supposed to be a safe place," Mary told a reporter, her voice shaky as she held onto her Starbucks cup tightly. Outside the mall, everyone was worried, and the people in the town exchanged nervous looks. A group of friends gathered together for support, talked about the incident that had shaken their once quiet town. "I was just getting my usual Starbucks drink when I heard the gunshot. It feels unreal," one of them said, showing how hard it was to believe. As time passed, the town of Rivertown struggled with what happened. There were rumors and theories, and the community tried to find comfort in the fact that they were all shocked together. Starbucks, which used to be a comforting and routine place, now reminds everyone of the unexpected tragedy that happened there. Days turned into weeks, and the investigation into the shooting kept going. The person responsible was still not caught, making the town anxious. Starbucks, now decorated with makeshift memorials and messages of support, became a place where the community gathered to share their grief. Mary, haunted by the memory of that day, went back to Starbucks with a mix of fear and determination. As she drank her coffee, she overheard bits of conversations from other people there. "I can't believe it happened here, right at our Starbucks," one person quietly said, their voice showing vulnerability. "Yeah, it's like we're living in a different world now," another person replied, their eyes reflecting the shared trauma that hit the once peaceful town. Despite the adversity, the Starbucks employees worked hard to bring back a sense of normalcy. As Mary looked at the familiar faces behind the counter, she felt a bit of hope amid the ongoing uncertainty. The investigation into the shooting eventually led to the capture of the suspect. Motives were uncovered, and the town slowly began to heal. Starbucks, with its well-known logo and comforting smells, became a symbol of resilience for the community. After the tragedy, conversations changed from fear to determination. The Starbucks that had seen the unthinkable became a place where stories of survival and strength were shared. The ordinary coffee shop had turned into a sign of the unyielding spirit of a community determined to overcome tough times. As Mary sat at her usual table, looking out the Starbucks window, she couldn't help but think about the resilience of Rivertown. The town had faced a nightmare, but its people had come together, finding comfort and strength in the familiar setting of their beloved Starbucks.
"What is it now, Peter?" I shouted in frustration when he asked me to stop the car for the third time. "I'm thirsty," he said in an apologetic tone. "Are you being serious, dude? First, you stopped the car to pee. Second time, you had to pee again, and now you're feeling thirsty? Why? So you can stop for the fourth time to pee again? At this rate, we are never going to make it to Marcus's wedding," I scolded him in frustration. "This is the last time, dude, I promise," Peter requested. "Fine. "I'll stop if we see any store open at this hour," I sighed and said. After that, I focused my attention on the road while Peter's eyes were looking for a store. That was when we sighted a 7-Eleven on the side of the road. The signboard looked a bit old and rusty, but the store looked in top condition. I was also getting thirsty, so I decided to listen to him and park the car in the front parking area of the store. As we were getting out of the car, the door got stuck for some reason. We tried for a few minutes. It wasn't opening. "I think even our car is tired from stopping so much. Should we continue driving now?" I said in a sarcastic voice. "Okay, but let's just try one last time. If the door still doesn't open, then we will continue driving," Peter said. I took his advice and gave it another try, and the door opened. We got out of the car and started walking toward the entry gate of 7-Eleven, and that was when the light on the signboard started to fluctuate. I know what you guys may be thinking, but no, we did not think that it was something haunted. Instead, we thought that they should change this old junk. As we walked inside, we saw a gorgeous woman at the cash counter turning her face toward us and saying welcome in her soft voice. I admired her beauty for a minute or so, but then I walked ahead to grab the drinks. And as I was grabbing the drinks, I thought that I should buy edibles as well, because you never know when Peter asked me for the fourth stop. After that, he might feel hungry. So I just went ahead and grabbed some cookies and chips for us, and then walked toward the cash counter. I was not surprised to see that Peter was giving it his all with flirting with this girl, but she wasn't giving him a response and was completely focused on staring at a blue pen that was lying around at the counter. It felt a bit weird to me, but I think Peter wasn't going to budge from there because of any reason. I went ahead and she started billing the products. That was when some weird bad smell hit my nose, and I looked around to see if something was spoiled over there, but everything looked fresh and clean to me. I looked over at Peter and the girl, but they did not seem bothered by it, so I thought that it must be my imagination. After the billing was done, I made my payment and started to walk out of the door, but Peter was still standing there trying to talk to her. "Dude, are you coming or should I just leave you behind?" I said in frustration, because the longer we stayed here, the later we would be at the wedding and Marcus would kill us. Peter looked at me and silently walked closer. I thought he was going to leave with me, but then he said, "Can't you be a little late for your best friend? Don't you know how long it's been since I had sex? Please, a little help here. Just wait for a few minutes, and if she does not respond, then I will leave with you." I had no other choice because I could not leave this shit of a person behind, so I said fine and stood there waiting. 15 minutes passed, but the girl did not give him any response, so I had to drag him out of the place. I could still smell that stench that was just getting stronger, but I still left the place. We drove out of the place and Peter's face was still down, as if I'd just made him drink poison or something. "Sam, pass me the drink. By the way, did you smell something bad there?" Peter finally spoke after 10 minutes of silence, which was the longest he had stayed silent till now. "Yeah, I also smelled it. It was like something was spoiled in there," I replied while taking out the drink from the carry bag and handing it to him. The drink felt warm by touch. Felt a bit weird. But then I thought it must be because of the time that had passed since we bought the drinks. "You're right, but everything looked fresh and fine to me." He tried to open the can, but it broke, and I turned my head only to see that it was rust and that bad smell had spread throughout the car. "Ugh, what the hell is that? What did you grab from there when I was distracted, Sam?" Peter said while making a disgusted and freaked out face. "No, when I picked them up they were just fine. Wait a sec, let me check the other packages." I immediately picked up the bag and saw that it was also in very bad condition, which I instantly threw outside the car window. I was panicking inside, but I told Peter that I may not have noticed it. I know he was freaked out too, but we both acted calm and continued driving in complete silence. After attending the wedding, when we were coming back and passing through the same place in the middle of the day, we noticed 7-Eleven wasn't there. Instead, there was a burned building. I stopped the car and asked around about that. The people who used to live here told us that there used to be a 7-Eleven here about 6 months ago, but a fire broke out and it burned. During the fire, a cashier girl who used to work there got stuck and she died there. She told us that the girl was extremely beautiful. Peter and I looked at each other. Sweat had started to drip from our faces, and we quietly went back inside the car.
Murder of the pizza guy. Okay, so what do we have? Senior Detective Luther entered the room and asked, "Guess he'll be in charge of this from now on. Sir, we know the victim's name is Adam Carl. He was 25 years old and he was just working with the newly opened Yum Pizza store. He was a delivery guy. The day he was murdered, he was returning from a delivery, but unfortunately, he was murdered on his way when the street surveillance camera was already broken. At the moment, there's no strong suspect in our hands. I gave him the file while telling him the basic details of the case. My name is Marcus Neon. I'm a 28-year-old detective in North Carolina. The case we're working on is currently the most complex one because the boy who was murdered lived alone with his little brother. No family connection has been found, so it's harder to find suspects with motives to murder him. His criminal records are clean and he never once got into a fight with anyone. So the case is going to take a little bit more time before getting completely solved. The local police gave our department this case because it's getting the eye of everyone. Medias everywhere are trying to connect this case with several other theories, but in reality, it's not as easy as it looks. I've been pulling all-nighters in a row from the day that I got this case. In this case, it's like a mystery because whoever the culprit is, he thought of every possible move in advance before committing the crime. It's been more than a week since we found the body. There were stab marks on his body, but no weapons were found at the crime scene. The body was immediately sent for autopsy and the results were in just the day before yesterday. According to the results, the cause of his death was strangling by rope and his body was stabbed after he died. Detective Neon, what do you think of this case? You've been working on it from the start, right? After reading the file carefully, Senior Detective Luther turned his head towards me and asked, I've concluded that the culprit planned all of this, which means that the pizza delivery must also have been included in this. So the culprit can be someone who's already working in the pizza place, or it must be someone who's one of his regulars. It's either a grudge or jealousy. These were the only possibilities I'd come up with yet. Don't you think it's related to love? Did he not have a girlfriend? He asked in a calm tone, as if he was trying to process and deduct the possibilities of the murder. Yes, Portia Nina was the name of his girlfriend. She was a fellow worker in the store. She got another job offer, so she resigned, but I don't think she's related to his murder in any possible way. They broke up about a month ago before his death, and they were on pretty good terms even after the breakup. I picked up another file that had all this information while telling him this. What about her now? Is she seeing someone? He took the file from my hand and asked while keeping his focus on the file. No, she denied being involved with someone during the questioning. He looked up as I said that. And you believe that? How long has it been since you started working as a detective, Mr. Neon? 2 years, sir. I hesitated at his question at first, but then responded in a loud, respectful tone. Detective Neon, by this time, you may have realized that we don't believe anything until we have proof. Now put someone on the trail of Miss Nina. I think she's somehow related to this murder. He exited the room after saying that, and his suspicion of Nina made me confused. I picked up my phone and gave a call to Anthony, asking him to trail Nina's every move. After that, I picked up the file again and started going through it. According to Adam's coworkers, he came to work on time as usual. He went for his first delivery at around 10:15 a.m. and he returned on time. His day was pretty much normal. He delivered pizza and looked happy when he received a nice amount of tips. At around 6:38 p.m., he went on his last delivery, just before he was murdered. The customer was one of the regulars. She normally used to put on a special request and ask for Marcus to deliver her pizza. At first, she was on my suspect list, but after questioning her, I removed her from that. She was just a single mother of newly born twins, so I don't think she had the motive or energy for the crime. As I was reading the file, to find another clue, I received a call from Anthony. Sir, I was tailing Nina. I saw her with a man. They looked like they were arguing. What Anthony was saying shocked me because Nina told me that she was not involved with any men. I think the senior must be right about Nina's involvement in the crime. You took pictures, right? I asked Anthony. Yes, sir, sharing them right away. As he said that, a notification bell rang and I received the pictures. Checked the database for the man to see if he had any past criminal records, and I got it. His name was Carl Harris, and he was previously a suspect in the murder of a middle-aged man 2 years ago. At the time, he was involved with his wife, but soon after his suspicion, the wife also committed suicide. She had written a suicide note that matched her handwriting in which she confessed to murdering her husband because he was abusive towards her. That case was closed after that, and Carl was removed from being a suspect. He was also in for harassing women multiple times. I called Nina in for questioning and started to ask her questions related to Carl. Her expressions were surprisingly calm, as if she knew this was coming. Were you involved in Adam's murder along with Carl? I asked her. No, I've told you multiple times that I'm not involved in his murder, she said in an annoyed tone. Okay, maybe you're not, but you're not denying Carl's involved either. Nina, do you know something? As the senior said that, I could notice the nervousness on Nina's face, as if she wanted to hide something. You know, we have enough proof to put you in for murder of Adam if you try to hide something. Either this, or you'll end up committing suicide like the previous woman Clara framed. I only said this to scare Nina, and it worked. She started to cry. She told us that Carl suddenly showed up out of nowhere and started to harass her, saying he wanted to date her. But when she rejected him, saying that she was still in love with Adam, just to get him off her back, he disappeared for a week. Nina thought he finally backed down, but one day, she suddenly got the news that Adam was murdered. Carl came back the day after Adam's murder and continued to harass her. She told us that she only suspected that Carl killed Adam, but she never got any proof that Carl ever said anything about it. We dispatched a team to bring Carl in for questioning, and another team was dispatched to search Carl's apartment and car for evidence. The rope and the knife were found in his bedroom closet, and it was sent into the forensics lab. While questioning Carl, he was silent the entire time and did not tell us anything. The senior detective got a warrant to put him in under arrest because he was convinced that Carl is the culprit. A week later, the forensics results were in, and Adam's DNA along with Carl's fingerprints were found on the weapons. After that, he was officially arrested for killing Adam, but he still hasn't revealed how he killed him, or even what happened on the day when Adam was returning after his last delivery. One thing is for sure, my respect for Senior Detective Luther has increased because he was right all along, and I guess I'm going to reopen the case of that middle-aged man because I don't think his wife killed him, or that the wife committed suicide either.
I'm feeling tired and sleepy. I need coffee. For me, working without coffee is impossible. I always say coffee is my drug, and my favorite coffee place is Starbucks. Speaking of coffee, I remember witnessing a weird incident that occurred last year at Starbucks. A woman was convicted of drug trafficking. She didn't look like someone capable of committing such a crime, but we should never judge a book by its cover. My name is Laurel Smith. I'm 23 years old, and I work as a journalist in Michigan. While working as a journalist, I was assigned to interview the football team. So I went to the football tournament stadium and gathered as much information as I could get. After that, I began to take interviews, and there was one player who was trying to flirt with me. During the interview, I tried to avoid his cheesy answers. Although his answers were funny, I didn't laugh. After finishing the interview, he came to me and asked me for coffee. He was good looking, so I accepted the offer. His name was Andrew. He was tall and handsome. We decided to meet the next day at Starbucks and also exchange numbers. I had an ulterior motive behind it. I wanted to get an inside scoop on the football game. The next morning, Andrew texted me and asked me about the meeting time. I told him we'll meet during my lunch hour at Starbucks near my office, so I went there at lunchtime, but Andrew wasn't there yet. I waited for him for a while, and when he didn't show up, I decided to go back. While I was leaving the cafe, I saw him standing with a woman. It made me furious for some reason, so I went toward him and said, "This was a sick idea of a prank." Andrew was startled to see me, and he looked like he didn't understand why I was behaving like that. Honestly, I didn't either. I went back to the office without eating lunch. After around 30 minutes, I was called to my team leader's cabin. My team leader said that a football star is asking around for me. I was shocked to hear that. My team leader assessed the situation perfectly and told me to use this opportunity to get close to the player. He told me to get an exclusive interview with Andrew. Andrew was the ace of the football team and a star player. He was like a celebrity. I went back to my cabin and called Andrew to apologize for my behavior. He told me he would only forgive me if I agreed to go on another coffee date. I told him to meet me on the weekend. On the weekend, we met at the same Starbucks. This time, he came before me and had ordered my favorite coffee, which was shocking and creepy, so I asked him, "How did you find out about my favorite coffee?" He pointed towards his phone. I was confused. He looked at me and said, "I stalked your Instagram account." Then he took a pause and laughed. I was still confused. After chatting for a little while, I felt the need to use the restroom. I told Andrew that I was going to the restroom, and I went there. After I returned, I saw a woman sitting in front of Andrew. It was the same woman from that day. Andrew still hadn't explained himself for that day, and now this again? This time, instead of walking away, I decided to confront them. I went ahead and asked Andrew, "What's this about?" He replied, "Before you misunderstand, I want you to calm down and listen first." Without saying anything, I sat there and started to listen. Andrew told me that the woman's name was Betty. She was homeless and a single mother. She needed funds to raise her child, so he decided to donate money to her. Judging by her appearance, it wasn't hard to believe that she was not very well off. After explaining the situation to me, the woman thanked Andrew for giving her a check. Andrew apologized to me and told me not to share this with anyone. I felt bad for doubting him. So I asked him to meet next week, but he told me that he won't be able to meet next week because of a semi-final match. He dropped me home after that. We became friends, and he shared some spicy stories about the football team. I was happy to get the scoop that I wanted, and I began to like Andrew. After his semi-final match, we met at Starbucks. His team had won and was going to the final tournament. I was happy for him. There were several articles about Andrew, and one of the argues was about him dating me. It was written by my colleague Sasha. Everyone was teasing me at my workplace. I was happy on the inside, but acted as if it made me angry. A day before Andrew's final match, we met at the same Starbucks. Andrew told me that he liked me and asked me to watch the football game the next day. When I went to the stadium, I looked for Andrew everywhere, but he was nowhere to be found. The coach told me he was not picking up his phone, so he had sent someone to pick him up from his home. The match was about to begin. The rival team was already there, and the announcer was calling the names of the players. Everyone else was present except for Andrew. Sasha called me and told me to go to the police station. When I reached there, I found out that Andrew had been arrested for driving after taking drugs. This was a big shock for me. I asked him what happened. He said that someone spiked his coffee at Starbucks. I asked him to tell me the details. He told me that he went to Starbucks before going to the stadium, and there he met Betty and gave her another check for donation. Then he took his coffee and returned to his car. I figured out what was going on, so I told the police about Betty. After investigation, the police found out that Betty was indeed a drug trafficker. Andrew got released, and Betty got arrested for drug trafficking and spiking his coffee. Andrew did not get to play in the final match. His innocence was proven, so he was allowed to continue his athletic career. I got a big scoop and got promoted. After that day, I never talked to Andrew, nor did he try to contact me again. I knew what happened, but kept quiet. Andrew was never making donations. Betty was his drug dealer all along.
this wonderful modern time, we have the luxury of ordering just about any food we want for delivery. It's easy to get anything from pizza to a chicken sandwich. On the flip side, we can take jobs as delivery drivers and make a few bucks on the side. It's easy work, and when you're a single mother like me, any extra income is good income. A few weeks ago, I delivered some food to a nice suburban community. It was one of those neighborhoods you'd see on a Disney Channel show. Nice houses, picket fences, you know the neighborhoods I'm talking about. And like all the deliveries I make, I'm supposed to take a picture of the food at the front door. Think of it as like an insurance policy in case the food is at the wrong house or stolen or something weird happens. I place the food in front of the door, on top of the small staircase that leads to the door. I took a few steps back and took a picture of it. After taking the picture, I was walking back to my car when I was confronted by an extremely angry and enraged woman who came out from the house across the street. I asked her what her problem was, and she just kept screaming at me, saying that it was private property and that I was trespassing. I tried explaining one time to the woman what I did and why I took the picture, and it did not compute in her tiny little brain. After being continuously cut off every time I tried to speak, I decided to just get into my car and drive away. I tried being nice, but clearly this woman was insane. I got inside my car and was checking my phone for another delivery. The woman started to bang on the hood of my car, causing me to jump from being startled. I got out of the car aggressively to see if there was any damage, and she ran back to her house. There was no damage, but I was so done with this delivery and I decided to just call it a night. I ended up driving home and spending the evening with my daughter. We ate dinner, played some games, and watched a movie together. I put her to bed and started binge-watching one of my favorite shows, and I would have guessed that it was around midnight when I heard someone knocking at my front door. Knocking rather aggressively, I might add. I couldn't believe what I was looking at through the peephole in the door. It was the crazy woman from the delivery earlier in the day. I didn't answer. I didn't even say anything. I just kept watching this woman, trying to figure out what she was doing at my house. She had to have followed me home, which was already insanely creepy. And while I was watching her, she went over to the walkway that led to my front door. From the driveway, I have this path of little stones that leads to the front door. It's not like big slabs of pavement, but rather small stones that almost fit together like a mosaic. The woman grabbed one of the stones, roughly the size of an average dinner plate, and put it behind her back. She started to knock on the door again, still concealing the stone behind her back. And this is where things get very weird. I didn't answer the door, but I shouted to her that I had called the police. And this must have scared her because she threw the stone at my house and ran away. I did end up calling the police and reporting what happened. They followed up, but nothing really came of it, and that was the end of the story until recently. If that was all that happened, that would be scary enough, not knowing what she wanted from me and her showing up in the middle of the night. But things got much worse. About a week after the incident, I saw the woman at the grocery store. No confrontation or anything like that, but then I saw her several other times just driving. Again, no confrontation or anything else. I wanted to say it was just a coincidence, but it almost felt a little too weird. I have a friend who is married to a cop, and I talked to him about it. I explained that something felt off, but it's possible that it was just pure chance that I kept noticing her, and he agreed. He basically said that because I'm aware of this woman, I'm subconsciously picking her out of the crowd in our town. I didn't like that answer, but I guess technically he was right. It is a pretty smallish town after all. And this brings me to about a week ago as of me writing this account. I just got my daughter on the bus and I was outside pulling some weeds. While I was on the ground, I could feel someone standing over me. I turned around, and it was that woman. The same damn woman from that stupid delivery. I was completely vulnerable in that position and I didn't know what to do. And she said in a sort of soft but angry voice, "You're a monster for calling the cops. You're a trespasser." I noticed that she had one of my stones again, and without thinking, flight mode kicked in, and I got up and ran as fast as I could. She actually tried hitting me with a stone, but she missed. I ran inside and locked the door. I called the police and told them that she was back and trying to hit me with a rock. The police showed up, and this time, they arrested that crazy woman. It turns out that that woman had some pre-existing history of mental health. I'm not exactly sure what it was. And because this is so fresh, I don't exactly know what happened to her. I saw her get taken away in the back of a squad car because she was still at my house when the police came. And I just hope this nightmare is over. At least for now, it seems to be over. I just hope that she gets the help that she needs and that I never have to see her crazy face again.
Police duty in summer. It was a really hot summer night in the small town of Cedarville. Detective Luna Mitchell was in the police station, drinking iced coffee in the dim light. She had no idea that something big was about to happen. At 3:45 a.m., the police radio started buzzing with reports of cars being damaged at an apartment complex on Oak Street. Luna felt a surge of energy as she quickly grabbed her badge and headed to the scene. The night was supposed to be calm, but now it was filled with confusion and trouble. When Luna got to the place, she saw a lot of wrecked cars with broken glass glinting in the moonlight. It bothered her because this destruction wasn't just about money. It messed up the lives of regular folks just trying to get by. Detective Michael Turner, Luna's partner, showed up too. They started gathering proof, taking pictures, and talking to upset car owners. The damage was bad, and people in the town were getting more and more frustrated. The summer that was supposed to be calm was turning into a time of trouble. As the sun came up, Luna and Michael listened to what witnesses had to say. They thought maybe 4 or 5 people were behind all this. The people of the town were already nervous and now had to deal with a scary truth, a bunch of lawlessness that didn't seem to be stopping. While Luna was at the scene, her phone rang, and it was Jake Thompson, the local MLA. He was worried about the growing crime and said families were thinking about leaving Cedarville for good. The once peaceful summer now felt scary, and the people felt like they couldn't do anything about it. But the police weren't giving up. Detective Senior Sergeant Rachel Williams took charge and promised to catch the people behind all the destruction. The hot summer weather matched the growing tension in Cedarville. As Luna and Michael investigated, they found something troubling. People were leaving their cars unlocked to avoid having their windows broken. It was a shocking sign of how bad things had gotten in Cedarville, a town that used to be calm but was now dealing with a lot more crime. Back at the police station, everyone was busy. Officers watched footage from the apartment complex cameras, hoping to see the people behind the car damage. The flickering images hinted at shadowy figures causing all the trouble. The summer heat made everything feel more urgent, just like the investigation. In the middle of all this chaos, the police got news of 4 robberies in the Bradling area in the last 24 hours. The crimes were spreading fast, like wildfire in the town. 2 of them were still happening, showing that the criminals were being bold. Luna and Michael rushed to the Bradling area with their sirens blaring through the quiet summer night. The streets were empty, but there was a tense feeling in the air. The cozy small-town feeling that used to be in Cedarville seemed to be disappearing under the hot, heavy summer. The first robbery happened at a small convenience store. It looked like the thieves left in a hurry, taking money from the registers and leaving things scattered on the floor. The word summer, which used to bring thoughts of warmth and joy, now made Luna think of crime and sadness. The second incident, reported at 8:15 p.m., had just happened. Luna and Michael checked out the scene, trying hard to figure out what was going on. The once peaceful town was now overshadowed by the dark events of the summer. Back at the police station, the investigation got more serious. Luna studied maps, trying to find any patterns in the crimes. The summer nights had turned into a fight between the police and those trying to take advantage of a town in chaos. The search for justice went on all day, with officers working hard under the hot summer sun. As the temperature went up, so did the police's determination. They looked into every lead, making sure nothing was left unexplored. Motivated by duty, they swiftly mobilized a strategic operation, strategically closing in on the criminals. One day, the police found out where the thief was hiding in a quiet and rarely visited place. As they went into the peaceful and empty area, they unexpectedly discovered a secret meeting of the thieves. The police quickly and quietly approached the criminals, who were deeply engaged in conversation. Because the thieves weren't expecting it, the police successfully captured the entire gang. In this deserted location, where hardly anyone went, justice won, and the once hidden meeting place became the downfall of the infamous thieves. The town, tired from the summer of crime, felt relief knowing that law enforcement was taking decisive action. When the handcuffs clicked on the suspect, the summer sun was going down, casting a warm light on Cedarville. The town, once troubled, now stood together, thankful for the hard work of those who brought peace back to their streets. The team of police also felt proud of themselves and promised to continue their hardship. The robbers were caught and admitted to damaging cars and engaging in criminal activities. They faced legal consequences for their actions, receiving punishment according to the law. The admission of guilt ensured justice prevailed, holding the individuals accountable for their crimes. This resolution provided relief to the victims and contributed to the safety of the community. Afterward, the community joined forces to rebuild and heal. The scars from the summer of crime would stick around, but Cedarville became stronger, tougher, and committed to keeping the peace that had defined the town for a long time. The summer, which had begun with a lot of trouble, ended with everyone feeling more united. The police, working under the hot sun and through the long summer nights, had won. Cedarville could look forward to the season with hope and positivity, knowing that its protectors were always ready to keep them safe.
In the heart of Oakland, the 7-Eleven store on Harrison Street stood as a community hub, a place where locals would gather for late-night snacks or a quick chat with the friendly security guard James Johnson. The Adams Point neighborhood was familiar with his towering figure, a 59-year-old man known for his kindness and unwavering commitment to keeping the store safe. One fateful Friday night, tragedy struck the 7-Eleven community. James, affectionately called JJ by regulars, was shot and killed during a robbery inside the store. As news of the incident spread, shock and grief enveloped the neighborhood. Among the crowd that gathered outside the 7-Eleven, a woman named Snow collapsed on the sidewalk, tears streaming down her face. James Johnson was not just a security guard, he was her father. In between sobs, she spoke about her father's dedication to protecting the 7-Eleven family. "He was protecting the family at 7-Eleven, 'cause I know how my father is. He would do that for anyone he cared and loved," Snow said, her voice breaking with emotion. The store, just a block from Lake Merritt, had become more than just a place to purchase convenience items. It was a tight-knit community where the customers felt a sense of belonging, largely due to James's warm presence. "He was a great man. He was a very great man. He was one of those guys who would give you anything if you needed anything," Snow continued, wiping away her tears. Longtime customers echoed Snow's sentiments, describing James as a protector and a kind-hearted individual. Joseph Silva, a regular at the 7-Eleven, emphasized James's positive impact on the community. "James is a good person, good for the community, and this guy helped everybody and took care of everybody here," Silva remarked, shaking his head in disbelief. As the news of James's tragic death spread, the neighborhood began to reflect on the escalating crime in Oakland. The 7-Eleven had become a target for criminals, with multiple incidents in recent weeks. "Criminals have repeatedly targeted the 7-Eleven stores in Oakland," a somber Joseph Silva noted, referencing the recent shooting outside another 7-Eleven and a brazen robbery involving 8 gunmen just a couple of weeks ago. Amid the grief and shock, Snow revealed the personal toll the situation had taken on her family. Her mother, Julie Johnson, had passed away only 10 months ago. Now, with her father gone, Snow found herself with few family members left. "She died 4 days before my birthday, and I just found out from my little brother that my dad died," Snow said, her voice tinged with a mix of sorrow and frustration. The 7-Eleven on Harrison Street had become a symbol of the challenges facing Oakland. Brian Walcott, another member who frequented the store, reflected on the senseless violence that seemed to be gripping the city. "Oakland is dangerous right now. Things need to change," Walcott remarked, voicing a sentiment shared by many in the community. As the investigation unfolded, the police revealed that they had surveillance footage of the shooting, but had made no arrests as of yet. The 7-Eleven community was left grappling with grief, anger, and a thirst for justice. In the days that followed, the 7-Eleven store became a makeshift memorial for James Johnson. Flowers, candles, and handwritten notes adorned the entrance, a testament to the impact he had on the lives of those in the neighborhood. Detective Linda Martinez, assigned to the case, was determined to bring justice to James and his grieving family. She spent hours reviewing surveillance footage, looking for any clues that could lead to the identification of the perpetrator. One evening, as Detective Martinez sifted through the footage, she noticed a suspicious figure lingering near the store just before the incident. The individual's face was obscured, but their movement seemed calculated. Determined to crack the case, Detective Martinez intensified her efforts, canvassing the neighborhood for witnesses and information. During her investigation, Detective Martinez discovered a pattern of criminal activity targeting 7-Eleven stores in Oakland. The convenience of the late-night hours made these stores vulnerable, attracting criminals looking for easy targets. In a tense meeting with the local community, Detective Martinez shared her findings and urged residents to be vigilant. The 7-Eleven community, still grieving the loss of James Johnson, responded with a renewed sense of unity. They organized neighborhood patrols and worked closely with law enforcement to ensure the safety of their community. As the weeks passed, Detective Martinez's relentless pursuit of justice yielded results. A tip from a concerned citizen led her to a suspect with a history of involvement in similar crimes. The evidence began to align, and the case against the perpetrator strengthened. In a dramatic turn of events, the suspect was apprehended, and the community breathed a collective sigh of relief. The arrest brought a sense of closure to the grieving 7-Eleven community, which had rallied together in the face of tragedy. The trial that followed was a somber affair, attended by members of the 7-Eleven community, including Snow. The courtroom echoed with the weight of loss and the determination to see justice served. The perpetrator, facing charges for robbery and murder, was held accountable for the senseless act that had claimed James Johnson's life. As the trial concluded, Snow stood outside the courthouse, grateful for the closure, but forever changed by the events that had unfolded. The 7-Eleven community, though scarred by tragedy, emerged stronger and more united than ever. In the aftermath of James Johnson's death, the 7-Eleven on Harrison Street became a symbol of resilience. The store reopened its doors, and a plaque in James's honor was displayed near the entrance. The community continued to gather, sharing stories of the man who had become a guardian of their late-night haven. While the wounds were deep, the 7-Eleven community found solace in the knowledge that justice had been served. As they moved forward, they remained vigilant, determined to protect the place that had been both a sanctuary and a scene of heartbreaking loss. The memory of James Johnson lived on in the hearts of those who frequented the 7-Eleven on Harrison Street, a reminder that even in the face of darkness, a community could come together and stand strong.
Over the years, I have heard many men complaining about how it's impossible to please a woman. From my best friend Tommy to my grandfather Maynard, they all kept saying making a woman happy is no easy job. None of them were ever able to truly claim that they could ever understand how to make them happy. But it wasn't a tad bit hard for me, because I had made a lot of women happy over the years. But on one very unusual Wednesday afternoon, I made one woman a little happier than intended. My name's Charlie Huffman. I'm a 34-year-old masseur, and I've been doing this for the past 12 years of my life. All my life, since I started giving out massages to women, I never once heard any of them complain about it. But they did complain a lot about how unhappy their lives were, or how their husbands or boyfriends had no clue about how to make things right. I was so good at my job that once a woman received a message from me, they would insist on being my client. Because of that very reason, I had to turn away most of them. I'm a human just like the rest of you, so I'm also selfish and greedy like that. The only clients I didn't turn away were those who could offer me something better, something interesting in return. Some were ready to offer me tons of money, while some were ready to give me their gorgeous bodies. I have no idea how I developed such interesting and amazing techniques to satisfy them, but it was so clear that they all loved letting me take away all the stresses in their lives. It was one day when I was giving a massage when I received a special request from a rich lady named Patricia Miller, who had recently transferred to the town to give her a massage. It was her first time, so I thought I would accept it and see what happened. Her special request was that I go to her house instead of her coming to my place, so I told the servant who came with the request that I would be charging her 3 times more if I would go there, to which she agreed. I was supposed to go and give her a massage on Wednesday at 11 a.m., but I reached 8 minutes early. She had already prepared everything that was needed for the massage: a table, massage oil, lotions, creams, covers, towels, a foot roll bolster. Hell, she even had music prepared. I was quite impressed by that. "I've heard a lot about you from the ladies," she said in a low, seducing tone. "I bet you have." My tone was rather sarcastic, but it was pretty obvious that she called me after hearing about me. "Did you like the preparations I made for the session?" she asked in the same low tone. "Yes, I can see you've done your research. Shall we get started?" I asked, while keeping my tone professional. She smiled at me, and then slipped the robe she was wearing. There was absolutely nothing underneath. I bet she may have heard that I prefer my clients to keep their underwear on, but it was clear she did not care about that. Since it was her first time, I thought I would let it slide. She lay down on the massage table, and I started giving her the best massage I could give, because I needed to take as much money from her as I could. As I was almost about to finish the massage, her body started to quiver. Her moans became louder, and her breathing became uneven. That's how I knew what was happening. The moment I finished giving her a massage, she turned to me and gave me a weirdly satisfied smile. "When can I hope for the next session?" she asked while catching up on her breath. "I'll be quite busy for the next few days because of my tight schedule, so I'll let you know when I'm available." It was true that I was busy, but I knew exactly when slots were open. But since I did not want to give this woman, who was a bad sign, another massage, I made up an excuse. There are all kinds of women in this world. Dangerous, devious predators waiting to strike. And this woman was a piece of bad news waiting to ruin my career. It was because of my career that I became so good at differentiating women. And the best way for me to spot a dangerous woman was to see how she behaved with a man on their first meeting. That's how I figured her to be someone whom I should avoid at any cost. After taking my pay, I went back to my place, since there was already some sessions scheduled. The day went all right afterward, and once it was over, I went back to my place. For the past couple of days, I had started seeing this girl, and she was a real gem. But that night, I didn't get a call from her, nor did she answer mine. I thought she must be busy somewhere, so I let it go and went to sleep. The next day, I went to work at my usual time. But after waiting for about an hour for my first client, who was a regular, they did not show up. I called her, but she didn't answer. Thinking it might be a coincidence, I ignored it and started waiting for the next client. But weirdly enough, the second client didn't show up either. The limit of my patience was crossed when the third and fourth clients didn't show up either. started to make me feel nervous and scared. That was when someone walked in. I felt thankful that at least not all of them canceled, but then I turned around face to face with her, and I froze. "You're not too busy today, are you?" It was Patricia. She was standing in front of me with a smile that disgusted me. "Did you do something to my clients?" I asked in an angry tone. "Well, it's nobody's fault if there was a fire during a tea party." She laughed while coming closer. "You're sick," I said with disgust in my voice, which she did not like. "You said you were too busy to give me a massage, so I just made time for myself," she said. "Why are you doing this? We don't even know each other." My voice was showing obvious signs of frustration. "Maybe you don't remember me, but I do. I was one of your very first clients back in Manhattan when you started your career as a masseur, but all of a sudden you disappeared. You had no idea how devastated I was, since I was in love with you. But now we can be together, Charlie." She cupped my face while smiling and telling me all of this. "Oh, hell no. Get out of here, woman. I don't even remember you. How can you think I would be with you?" I slapped her hands away and said all of this in disgust. She became furious and started screaming and throwing things at me like a sociopath. No, actually, the way she was behaving, she was a sociopath. As I was trying to get away from her, she fell and hit her head on the massage table. I went to check if she was all right, but she wasn't breathing. I couldn't understand what I was supposed to do, and that's when I remembered something she said earlier. I threw scented candles on the curtains and drapes and caught it fire before it could spread in the area. I got out and locked the gate from outside. As I was walking away from the crime scene, I'm hoping for her body to burn down completely, or else I would have to come up with another lie to cover up. It was December 31st, and I could feel the dread creeping up on me. This day, along with its counterpart, January 1st, are the 2 days I despise the most. The reasons for my distaste are multifaceted. First, I fail to see the logic in celebrating the arrival of a new year, when in reality, another year is always just around the corner. Secondly, the hypocrisy of people who make fake resolutions only to break them the very next day is baffling to me. And lastly, the loneliness that engulfs me on this night is unbearable. As I sit alone in my living room drinking beer and watching others have fun, drink, dance, and kiss each other on TV, I'm left with nothing but my bitter thoughts. Perhaps my pessimism is due to my middle age, but nonetheless, these 2 days never fail to fill me with a sense of dread. I found myself in need of some comfort food, so I decided to order from KFC. Despite knowing how unhealthy it was, I wanted to indulge in some hot and crispy chicken wings. As I pulled out my phone and opened the KFC app, my Instagram notifications started flooding in. I felt a pang of annoyance when I saw a notification from Tiffany, who had posted pictures of herself at the New Year party she had gone to. I quickly turned off the notifications and focused on placing my order. I selected my favorite chicken wings and added some sides to the cart before finalizing the purchase. Despite feeling a little bitter about everything, I was looking forward to my KFC order and the temporary comfort it would bring. I kept switching between different channels on my TV. Couldn't help but notice that every single one was airing some sort of New Year's program, which only made my already sour mood even worse. However, after browsing through several channels, I finally settled on one that was showing the movie Puss in Boots and decided to watch it instead. As I settled in to watch the movie, I found myself glancing at my wristwatch often, eagerly anticipating the arrival of my food. However, time seemed to be moving at an agonizingly slow pace, like a snail crawling along. After 30 minutes had passed, I began to grow concerned that my food still had not arrived. I quickly opened up the food delivery app to check on the status of my order, which revealed that the delivery person was only a minute away from delivering my eagerly awaited meal. While I waited for the delivery guy to arrive, that 1 minute seemed to crawl by agonizingly slow. After what felt like an eternity, I heard a loud bang on my door, and I immediately assumed it was the delivery man. My heart racing with anticipation, I walked over to the door and peered through the peephole to confirm. But to my surprise, I didn't see a delivery executive standing there. Instead, there was a disheveled-looking man wearing a dirty brown shirt that looked like it hadn't been washed in days. His presence sent a chill down my spine, and I felt an ominous feeling in my gut. The man didn't knock or ring the doorbell again. He just stared at the door. Suddenly, he glanced around, and I noticed he was about to put his eye on the peephole. Without thinking, I quickly hid myself from view and placed my hands over my mouth to prevent any noise, for I had a gut feeling that this man was up to no good, and I couldn't help but feel my heart hammering in my chest. The ordinary night that I anticipated to be dull and uneventful was swiftly turning into a spine-chilling horror movie. I was at a loss for what to do, how to protect myself from the eerie presence lurking outside my apartment. However, before I could even gather my thoughts, I heard a voice. It was the delivery guy who had arrived with my food order. He called out to the stranger, asking if he was the only one who had placed the order. I peered through the peephole and saw the stranger trying to grab the bag of food from the delivery guy. The delivery guy, sensing that something was off, asked the stranger to confirm his identity. That's when things took a turn for the worst. The stranger's demeanor changed in an instant, and he lashed out at the delivery guy with startling ferocity. I could see the fear in the delivery guy's eyes as he struggled to defend himself. In that moment, I felt as if everything was happening in slow motion. I could feel my heart pounding against my chest as I watched the creepy stranger attack him. Realizing the gravity of the situation, I grabbed my cell phone and dialed 911 to report what was happening. As I waited for the police to arrive, I witnessed the creepy stranger taking out a sharp object. Panic set in as he lunged and stabbed the delivery guy. That was when the sirens of the police car pierced through the air and the man ran off. It was a terrifying experience, but thankfully, the police arrived on time and sent the delivery guy to a nearby hospital. I told them everything that happened, and the police began searching for the man. However, they couldn't find him. The authorities were never able to locate that man, which was even more unsettling considering the fact that he was still outside, waiting for a chance to attack someone. Though I never saw him after that night, the dread I once associated with December 31st and January 1st had intensified tenfold following that harrowing encounter. And as the years passed, the memory remained indelibly etched in my mind. I would often find myself pondering the potential outcomes if I had made the decision to open the door that night, and that thought alone was enough to send shivers down my spine.
Rebecca Lucille Schaefer was born in Eugene, Oregon on November 6, 1967. Her father, Dr. Benson Schaefer, was a child psychologist, while her mother was a writer and instructor at Portland Community College. Given how proud she was of her Jewish roots, young Rebecca would dream of becoming a rabbi. But after a chance encounter with a modeling agent, she began modeling clothes during her junior year in high school. Rebecca would become a popular subject of many photographers, and she made guest appearances, department store catalogs, and television commercials, as well as an extra in a straight-to-TV movie. She was so successful that in August of 1984, her parents gave her permission to move to New York City to pursue a full-time modeling career. At 5'7", she was considered too short for high-fashion modeling jobs and struggled to find work as a result. Rebecca even moved to Japan for a short stint in the hopes of finding work there, but found Japanese modeling standards were even stricter than back in the United States. Yet, within just a few months of moving back to New York, Rebecca landed her first TV role playing Amy Barnes in ABC's One Life to Live. The following year, she appeared on the cover of 17 magazine, which caught the attention of television producers who were casting for a sitcom called My Sister Sam. Through a series of grueling auditions, Rebecca won the role of Patricia Russell, and the series was initially a hit, but it was canceled halfway through its second season in 1988 due to failing ratings. The role established Rebecca's acting career and earned her several other roles in a variety of different productions. However, the role also brought her to the attention of an extremely dangerous and unstable young man, one that would have an indelible and catastrophic impact on her life, Robert John Bardo. The youngest of 7 children, Bardo was the son of a non-commissioned officer in the United States Air Force who had met his mother whilst deployed in Japan. Due to the nature of his father's occupation, the Bardo family moved frequently, eventually settling in Tucson, Arizona in 1983. And to say young Robert had a rough childhood would barely broach the issue. A young Robert was placed in foster care after abuse from one of his siblings got so bad that he threatened to take his own life. Couple that with the Bardo's family history of mental illness, and it's quite clear that he never really had a shot at emotionally stable adulthood. By the age of 15, Bardo had been institutionalized to treat severe emotional problems, and it was around then that he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Shortly after, he dropped out of Pueblo Magnet High School and began working as a janitor at a Jack-in-the-Box restaurant. By the time he was 19, he had been arrested 3 times for disorderly conduct. Bardo's neighbors would frequently complain that he exhibited unexplainably strange and threatening behavior towards them. Yet, it seems they had no idea how deep Bardo's madness extended. You see, Bardo had a dangerously obsessive personality and found himself increasingly obsessed with certain female celebrities. The first target of his dangerous obsession was with the 13-year-old Samantha Smith, an American schoolgirl, peace activist, and child actress from Manchester, Maine, who became famous during the Cold War after her death on August 25, 1985, Bar Harbor Airlines Flight 1808 plane crash. Bardo was devastated, but it was during a period of intense mourning that he discovered Rebecca Schaefer while watching My Sister Sam. After writing Rebecca numerous letters confessing his love for her, Bardo attempted to gain access to the set of My Sister Sam, who was turned away by security. It was then that Bardo turned to a terrifyingly creative method of discovering Rebecca's whereabouts. Bardo contacted a Los Angeles-based private detective agency, promising to pay them handsomely if they could obtain the address of one Rebecca Schaefer. Using the California Department of Motor Vehicles records, the private detectives successfully obtained Rebecca's address, passing it along to Bardo for a tidy sum. They had no idea how unhinged Bardo was, or what the ramifications of their actions were. They were soon to find out just how irresponsible they had truly been. On July 18, 1989, Bardo drove to Los Angeles to confront Rebecca at her home. He was angry because she hadn't bothered to reply to any of his letters, but not only that, he was furious because she appeared in a raunchy love scene in the movie scene from The Class Struggle and Beverly Hills. Bardo allegedly told Rebecca that she'd lost her innocence, and then in partaking in such an impure movie scene, had become just another Hollywood harlot. He entered this bizarre tirade by assuring her that he was a big fan. Now all he wanted was the best for her. Rebecca was terrified and told Bardo she wanted nothing to do with him, slamming the door in his face and rushing to call the police. They assured Rebecca they'd come over to her as soon as they could. But the situation wasn't an emergency at the moment, and no lights or sirens were rushing to her apartment. In the meantime, a heartbroken Bardo walked over to a nearby diner to get some breakfast. His plan to win over Rebecca had failed, but he also had a plan B, which he would use in the event of Rebecca's rejection. About an hour later, Rebecca's apartment doorbell rang again. Assuming it was the cops, she rushed over to answer the door, but when she stopped to open it, the only person she saw standing before her was Robert Bardo. Bardo raised a Ruger 357 handgun and shot Rebecca through the heart. He then tossed a copy of Catcher in the Rye into her apartment and was later arrested in Tucson while wandering through traffic. The following year, Bartle tried to argue that he was criminally insane, but a judge dismissed the idea and labeled him a dangerously obsessive but otherwise mentally competent person. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole and is currently serving his sentence at California's Avenue State Prison. As a consequence of Bartle's actions and his methods of obtaining Schaefer's address, the U.S. Congress passed the Driver Privacy Protection Act, which prohibits the State Department of Motor Vehicles from disclosing the home addresses of state residents. Rebecca's murder also prompted the first anti-stalking state laws, including the California Penal Code 6469, which was essentially the nation's first law against obsessive or fixated persons. It was a nice gesture, but few deny that they came too little, too late for Rebecca, who needed protection from a dangerous and violent stalker long before there were any legal means to combat them. We can only hope these laws are direct and robust enough to stop the same thing from happening again. But given the determination of the human spirit, that seems like wishful thinking indeed.
The first and the last time that I ever went to the Starbucks was with my friend Nate. He told me that the coffee there is great and that I can befriend some girls in there. Though the thing with Nate was that it was all about the girls for him, and I didn't care much about that, at least not until I actually left for college. My school were just over, and Nate was already starting the first year of college. He was a year older than me, and he was already settling into the college, and I was about to join him in the same college a year later. And Nate always told me, with girls, you want to be experienced as you can, because college is rough as an inexperienced person. And when I often asked him, isn't college for studies? And he would just say, yes, if you want to be a doctor or something, but even nerds need to have a good time in there. And even though every time he opened his mouth he sounded like an idiot, inside he was actually a very caring and generous man, and a great friend on top of that. To top it all off, he was an A student and have gotten into all Ivy League colleges but ignore them. He was a legend to us, and that is why I looked up to him. He was a great mentor regardless of that shallow image that he tried to show often. Our friendship was much more than I had with everyone who was in my class, so I hang out with Nate often. Nate was the kind of person you would think would be very communist on the edge, kind of the guy, but with all the things considered, he was very much into Starbucks, and it was the same Starbucks that he would go to every time. It was weird at first when I thought about it, and then I realized that it wasn't actually the coffee that he was interested in. As a matter of fact, it was the girl who made it. Nate was in love with this girl who worked at the Starbucks, and he often visited the place because of the girl. At first you wouldn't know that he was infatuated by her, but the frequent visits and the occasional blushing when she was around made it certain that Nate wasn't at the place for the sake of coffee. It was the first time that I saw Nate acting weird and underconfident. You wouldn't cross him as someone who would be this blushing and so quiet. It was out of ordinary for him to act in such a way. But it was Nate. He was obsessive in everything he did. And this felt like one of those occasions. Every single time we went to the Starbucks, he would line up and switch lines when she wasn't the one serving the coffee. Then one day when we were sitting, I said to Nate, "Come on, man, you have to ask her out. You're freaking Nate. You're the boss, man." And Nate looked at me as he wanted to get back the confidence that he was losing, and decided that he will ask the girl out. And he did. Her name was Natalie. And they were Nate and Natalie and looked so good together, but they were meant to be together. They were pretty much in love, and now that Nate had Natalie, he would spend much less time. Nate even thanked me when they got together as if I did everything. Nate and Natalie were going perfectly, and now we would hang out more in the Starbucks and get more and more free coffees. They were all good and tight, when one day, something happened that forever changed everything. It was the usual Friday night, and we were all at the Starbucks. Nate was sitting around, and Natalie was waiting for the shift to get over, and then from the front gate, the guy came in. His name was Michael. Michael was one of those quiet kids that always had a thing for Natalie. He came inside, and straight away came over to our table and said to Nate, "You're not good enough for Natalie. You'll never be. And you try, I will make sure you die." And then Nate said, "All right, man," and then shrugged him off. But that must have pissed off Michael, because the next thing he did was took the gun out and then shot Nate in his chest. There was nothing but silence. Nate's blood spattered across my face, and I was in shock of everything. And Nate was lying lifeless, and I was in complete trauma of losing my friend. And then that was the day that I last entered the Starbucks. There are still flashbacks of the incident that keep me awake in the night.
My grandpa used to work as a stevedore over in Savannah, and he'd tell us all kinds of stories from his time on the job. Like one time, they got a whole shipment of bananas from the Philippines or somewhere, and back in those days they'd transport the bananas still attached to the big old branches that they grew on. They'd pop the crate and then carefully pull the bananas out wearing real thick pairs of gloves, and they wore those gloves because of the tarantulas. The tarantulas didn't eat the bananas, but other smaller creepy crawlies would, making the banana branches a prime feeding ground for them. Most of the time, the workers over on the other side of the ocean would do their best to get all the bugs off their produce, but every so often, a tarantula would tuck itself away among the bunches after getting its fill of bugs, and then survive the entire transit process from whatever tropical islands that they were from to the ports of the United States. My grandpa said that one time he was working with this guy popping crates of bananas when the guy started to get a little too comfortable. He starts getting slow, talking when he should have been working, and then the next thing, Grandpa's turning around to see this guy's arm deep in a crate, but looking back at Grandpa trying to talk to him and paying no mind to what he was doing. Grandpa said that the second he turned around, he saw this huge, hairy spider just slowly wandering up the guy's arm, biggest thing he'd ever seen during all those years on the job. The guy couldn't feel it because of the big, thick, elbow-length glove that they used to wear to prevent spider bites and whatnot. Grandpa freezes, scared out of his wits, and then just points at the thing crawling up the guy's arm. Only then does the guy actually pay attention to what he's doing. But by then, it was too late. He sees the spider, then lets out this almighty yelp of terror, but this only succeeds in freaking the spider out too. I'm guessing the thing just kind of reacted on instinct and moved to neutralize the threat, so to speak. And still, instead of just jumping off his arm or something, the tarantula runs up the guy's sleeve, then makes this crazy leap right at the guy's face. Grandpa said that the guy's second scream, the one he did when the tarantula hit his face, was just about the loudest and most terrifying noise he'd ever heard. It was like a death scream or something, like the kind of sound a person can only make when they're in fear for their lives. Grandpa said that he did the first thing that came to mind, which was grab something to try and whack the spider off the guy's face. He grabbed a broom and then turned to run back over to his coworker, but saw that he'd already batted the spider off of him and was running for the door of the warehouse. They get outside, slam the door behind them, and Grandpa's checking if the guy is okay when he sees these two big puncture marks on the guy's lower cheek from where the spider had bit him. Again, Grandpa is dumbstruck with fright, and all he can do is quietly point towards where this guy's been bit. I think maybe he just didn't know that he had been bitten, maybe from the adrenaline or what have you, but a moment later, the guy puts a hand to his face and realizes that he's been bitten, and then promptly passes out. Grandpa thought that the guy was dead. He thought the spider's venom had gone straight to the guy's brain and killed him dead in an instant. But then, the same deadly spider is now loose in one of the warehouses, so Grandpa goes running off to warn everyone that his coworker was dead and that there'd be more deaths if they didn't get the hell out of the area. He starts screaming at everyone to run for their lives because some deadly spider just jumped out of a crate and killed the guy he was working with. And this causes a full-blown panic on the docks, with half the guys running to save their skins and the other half organizing impromptu hunting parties so they could track the spider down and kill it. In truth, the guy who had been bitten wasn't dead at all, he just passed out, like I said. But then the area around the bite got so swollen and red so fast that even though the guy woke up and started wandering around, confused, it didn't really do much to calm the situation down. The reality was that even though the bites from the spider were very nasty, they weren't even close to deadly. But since this was like the late 50s or something, there was no Discovery Channel back then, and folks just kind of assumed that every tropical tarantula had a bite that could kill a man stone dead in mere minutes. You had all these stevedores running around with just about any kind of weapon they could get their hands on until finally one of the bosses got wind of what was going on. He shut the place down for the night, called in animal control, and they sent a guy over to find and trap the spider before they took it over to some museum or something for identification. The guy who got bit spent the night in the hospital and then was back at work just a few days later. We always enjoyed hearing that story, but the thing is, that wasn't even the scariest or craziest story my grandpa had from his time as a stevedore. He'd always break the spider story out for the younger crowd at family gatherings, and after miming all the spider stuff with his fingers of one hand, he'd almost always have all the little girls running off in disgust while all the little boys sat around him, completely enraptured by the tale of an encounter with a great hairy monster. But then, after they'd all gone to bed or their parents had taken them home, he'd break out the wilder stories for the adults. Most of these consisted of things like fellas sneaking their girlfriends onto the job with them, then getting caught catching 7 minutes in heaven together in a back office or shipping container, or the time they stole a whole crate of scotch because they realized that there was a mistake on one of the shipping manifests. The right call would have been to simply correct the manifest, but nope. Almost $5,000 worth of luxury scotch went poof and disappeared, and everyone had a very Merry Christmas that year. But then on one occasion, he told us a straight-up horror story. Back during his first year of being a stevedore, my grandpa worked with this guy called Crazy Al. Al was a war veteran, as in he was in the army during World War II. The guys on the docks knew that he served in the Pacific Islands, and they knew that he'd seen some pretty messed up stuff too, but that was it. No one ever asked Crazy Al about the stuff that he'd seen or where he'd fought because no one wanted to upset him, and no one wanted to upset him because, like I said, he's Crazy Al. My grandpa said everyone felt for the guy, but that he wasn't particularly popular neither, on account of him being almost impossible to work with. Crazy Al couldn't be around loud noises, and woe betide anyone who accidentally startled him, so instead of working the warehouses and whatnot like the rest of the workers, Grandpa said Crazy Al was kept in the equipment room, where folks went to get tools, slings, safety gear, and things of that nature. You just didn't walk in either. You knocked really softly on the door till Al came to ask you what you wanted, and that way, he was kept at a safe distance from everyone else. Anyway, one day the docks get this big old cargo ship coming in, only right away they can tell something is different about it, because some of the containers had different kinds of letters on them. It turns out, the ship had come all the way from South Korea, and since the country was rebuilding from the war at that time, I figured this was one of the first Korean ships to dock in America for quite a while. So the ship docks, and these two Korean officers walked down the gangplank to greet the foreman in perfect English. They exchanged a few words, discussed the unloading of their ship, then off they went back to their quarters while the stevedores got to work. Sometime later, Crazy Al comes out of the equipment shed for some reason. Someone later said that they saw him walk out, and when he saw the ship floating in the dock, he just stopped and stared at it, like he was hypnotized or something. According to my grandpa, this person mentioned Crazy Al's episode to one of his coworkers, but since Al had more than earned his nickname by that point, it was kind of like, what else is new? And so the last people saw of Al, he was marching across the dock with a crowbar in hand, heading straight for the gangplank of the Korean ship. Then the next thing, everyone on the dock started to hear screaming coming from it. And there are screams and shouts all in Korean, and from the sounds of things, it was like they were having some kind of fight up there. Then the next thing, gunshots. And so everyone scatters and the cops get called. Everyone's still sort of hiding out, keeping an eye on the ship when the cops show up and run aboard with their guns drawn. And there, they find Crazy Al, shot to death with a crowbar in his hand. Then in the vicinity were 2 dead Koreans beat to death by Al and about half a dozen wounded Korean soldiers, one of which had shot Crazy Al dead with a gun that they kept on board for emergencies. For years, everyone kind of figured that Al had mistaken the Koreans for Japanese, which is obviously one of the 2 countries we were at war with while Al was serving as a soldier. But the truth is much more disturbing. You see, as it turned out, Al had been a prisoner in a Japanese POW camp, a particularly brutal one too. He'd seen his fellow soldiers tortured, executed, and slowly worked to death over the course of 2 to 3 years. He learned to hate the camp's guards, but not all of them were Japanese. Part of Japan's conquest of Asia included the Korean peninsula, and they gave a lot of Koreans a chance to prove their loyalty to their new masters by serving as guards in their prisoner of war camps. Then, to prove just how fanatically loyal they really were, they treated American POWs way, way crueler than the Japanese did, as a way of winning over their new masters. And Crazy Al probably had his very own Korean camp guard, and I'm not saying it could possibly excuse what he did to those poor sailors, but it certainly explains why he turned so murderous just at the sight of them. The thing is, folks just carried on thinking Al was crazy. Couldn't tell the difference between Korean and Japanese, they'd say. Stupid old Crazy Al, crazier than a poop house rat. But then, it seems to me and my grandpa that Al wasn't all that crazy after all. Sure, he was disturbed, but there's a chilling kind of clarity to him choosing to take vengeance like that. The way my grandpa tells it, he was just quiet. He didn't run across the docks, screaming and cursing, waving his crowbar around. He just walked, all cool and calm, to try and commit a massacre without saying a word. And that little detail never fails to creep me out.
I have reactive attachment disorder, and as a result, I struggle with severe depression. However, I don't take any medication. I say that because I was going through one of the worst bouts of depression I had suffered in a year and a half. And I wasn't hallucinating because of the medication. It was Tuesday night, or Wednesday morning, October 13th to 14th. I had cried myself to sleep like I had done for however many hours before. When I woke up, it was 3:34 a.m. My cat Betty was walking around on the bed, and for some reason, my alarm on my phone was going off. I used the Sleep Cycle app, and the alarm was going off even though I had set it for 5:30 to 6 a.m. So I am frustrated that it decided to stop working correctly. Then, I hear that my computer in the living room turns on. I thought that my other cat Vader must have knocked the mouse while wailing over the desk. Then I see the light turn on from the monitor. What? I thought. I was kind of pissed, so I started grumbling about the cats walking around, alarms going off unreasonably, and Vader knocking things about. Until I turned on the bedside lamp and saw both cats are lying at the end of my bed. Looking into my living room, I froze. I was so confused. I was trying to make sense of it when I heard my main door open, like the screen door first, then the front doorknob. Then I heard someone move across the carpet. Unlike the movies, I jumped out of bed as quietly as possible, wondering how the hell was someone entering my apartment, as I sure as hell locked the front door to the apartment. I silently stepped into the hall and peeked around the corner. My cats nonchalantly decided to ignore the obvious home invader, thief, or murderer that had entered our home. I looked around the corner, and the door was closed. The lights were off. The monitor was off. But I could hear the computer running. I stood there frozen and listened for any noise for God knows how long. But I could not make sense of it at all and couldn't sleep the whole night. It wasn't a dream. Maybe I was sleepwalking. I don't know. But I have never been afraid of my apartment. And at that very moment, I felt very afraid. Very much alone. It hasn't happened again. Or maybe it has. I just don't know.
At around 5:15 a.m. on the morning of July 6, 1997, a Starbucks employee arrived at work to open up the Wisconsin Avenue Northwest branch of the world-famous coffee company. Situated just north of Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., there was a lot of work to be done before the morning rush, and the employee in question had yet to imbibe their morning espresso to really kick them into gear. So by their own admission, they were pretty groggy by the time they headed out back to one of the freezer units, intending to fetch some of the breakfast pastries that will go on sale that morning. But when the overtired staff member cracked open the freezer unit, inside was the frozen, lifeless corpse of 25-year-old night manager Mary Catherine Mahoney, along with the bodies of 18-year-olds Emery Allen Evans and Aaron David Goodrich. Although they weren't always on the safe shift pattern, the employees knew his slain coworkers well, and the horror of witnessing their frozen, discolored cadavers was almost too much to bear. They raced out of the Starbucks and flagged down a bus driver who was only just beginning his morning route, and given how they could have called 911 from the on-site telephone, running to find the comfort of another living person is very telling of this person's distraught state of mind. Within 5 minutes of the initial 911 call, police were on the scene and taking stock of the situation. All three employees had obviously been herded into the rear freezer units before being shot execution style. But what initially confused the investigation was that not a single cent was missing from the Starbucks. If the motivation wasn't robbery, then it looked a lot like a brutally well-executed targeted killing. But why on earth would someone ambush and murder 3 coffee shop employees during their routine night shift? What made the murders on the more shocking was that Georgetown had been traditionally a low-crime area of Washington, D.C., with local district council member Jack Evans saying to have a triple homicide anywhere in the District of Columbia is an unusual event. But to have a triple homicide in Georgetown is extraordinary, and this has never been a place where crime has been a problem. Over the course of that balmy July morning, scores of blue uniformed officials made their way to the scene to look for evidence outside the split-level brown brick store. Homicide detectives and forensic technicians alike poured over the scene for hours on end after the bodies were found, working inside and outside the building adorned with the familiar green and black logo. They dusted doors for fingerprints, searched the store, and took statements from local residents in the hopes of piecing together what had happened. But it was only when Mary Mahoney, his car was examined, that further evidence was found. Evidence which indicated that the murderers were no random attack. Inside the car was spotless. Safer would look like signs that Mahoney had recently spent time playing with a pet, a dirty tennis ball, a plastic chew toy, a dog's brush, and a red cow. The only possible indication that something had gone awry was a flat tire on the front passenger side of the car, evidence that her attacker had made provisions to prevent her from fleeing. Mary was special. A mother later said she had an enormous heart. She probably would have compassion for the person who killed her. When she moved to Washington several years prior, Mary would jog alone an hour before daybreak, never worrying about being assaulted or attacked. She adored animals, particularly horses, and even took in Mary Lou, her sister Molly's toothless black and white alley cat. She attended various New York colleges before graduating with honors from Towson State University near Baltimore, and was a loyal and active Democrat, and turning for Bill Clinton when he was first elected. And according to her mother, it was a managerial job at Starbucks that really excited Mary. She had been employed by the company for 2 years and enjoyed being the manager. She was often seen sweeping the sidewalk in front of the store and obviously took pride in her store. What she didn't enjoy, though, was disciplining employees, particularly one that Mary had recently dismissed for allegedly stealing several $100s. She struggled with the issue before having to fire him. Her mother said, and for a long time, this became homicide detectives' main theory regarding the Starbucks shooting. Despite their hard work and determination, they came up short at every turn, eventually turning to the television law enforcement institution that is America's Most Wanted. After picking the case up, America's Most Wanted stated a thorough recreation of the murders and detailed many of the theories that the police were toying with. They also advised the number of an anonymous hotline, pleading with those with any information to come forward. And it seems this appeal struck a nerve with one member of the public, who called in with not only a frightening piece of information, but also a rather courageous proposal. In the hours following the broadcast of the Starbucks shootings, a woman called in America's Most Wanted hotline to inform them that she was dating a man who actually knew the shooter firsthand. This mystery person had confessed, even boasted of committing the murders, and on more than one occasion, the couple had initially taken the man's word in pure bluster. But after seeing the Starbucks shooting edition of America's Most Wanted, it became apparent that he might just be telling the truth. The woman then left her name and number so she could be contacted by DC police, and when they did so, she actually agreed to wear a wire for them in the hopes that she could catch a confession on tape. It was then that they learned their suspect's name, Carl D. Cooper. Cooper lived in Prince George's County near Baltimore City and just on the outskirts of Washington, D.C. itself. He was the son of a church deacon who lived with his wife and son, but at the time, he lived anything but the wholesome life of a family guy. At the time of the Starbucks shooting, Cooper was being charged with attempted murder in the 1996 shooting of an off-duty police officer in Prince George County. As far as family's complicity in his crimes, it turned out that it was Cooper's wife that purchased the 9mm handgun that her husband used to shoot the officer. It was the combination of this and his alleged involvement in the Starbucks shooting that led DC police to wiretap Cooper's home phone. He was arrested after making reference to several local shootings, but insisted that a friend of his named Keith Covington had joined him in the Starbucks robbery, and was him that executed the 3 victims. However, when they caught up with Covington, they discovered he had been recovering from a gunshot wound at the time of the murder, meaning it was highly unlikely that he was ever present on the scene, let alone the ones who have done the shooting. "If I killed them, I'd say I killed them," he reportedly said, but that's not me. I'm not saying I'm a saint, but I'm not going to go out and just kill people. You gotta be a dummy or a psycho to do something like that is pure evil. When confronted with the evidence of his lies, Cooper admitted to lying about his so-called friend's involvement because he killed 3 people and was afraid to go to jail. In the process of trying to avoid the death penalty, Cooper told the investigators he was sticking out the Starbucks for about a month, confirming that he acted alone and fired 2 guns, the .38 caliber snub-nose revolver and a .38 caliber pistol. Cooperating heavily due to the ever-looming threat of the death penalty, Cooper confessed to shooting the manager Mary Mahoney when she refused to give him the keys to the safe, which held over $10,000 in cash. When she said no, Cooper shot a warning shot into the ceiling, which sent a terrified Mahoney running into the employee hall. Cooper pursued, caught her, and wrestled with Mahoney over her keys. But when her resistance looked like it would be too much to overcome, they shot her dead. He then shot the 2 other Starbucks workers at the store, executing one as they survived the attack and attempting to crawl to safety. Cooper later stated that he wanted to put him out of his pain and misery, but it's more than likely this thinly veiled attempt at showing her to conscience was nothing but an attempt to dodge the first death penalty charge in over 30 years. During his trial, even when the relatives of the victim wept openly in court, Cooper remained chillingly composed. He also admitted to murdering 39-year-old security guard named Sandy Griffin during a botched robbery. Cooper had helped Griffin at gunpoint during demanding that the security guard hand over their expensive .40 caliber handgun. But then, fearing Griffin would assault him in the process to defend himself, the serial murderer executed the security guard before quickly fleeing the scene. Cooper admitted to then selling the pistol on the street for $300. Once Cooper was convicted of the Starbucks murders and sentenced to life in prison, Griffin's relatives were no doubt pleased that their loved one's killer had been put away. But they expressed frustrations that it had taken 3 more murders, maybe even more, before the killer had been caught. To them, a lack of urgency in the DC police force had cost 3 young people their lives and raised many questions regarding their competence and command. If the account of his defense attorney is to be believed, Cooper is nothing more than a career criminal whose shaky temperament and unbridled greed caused him to take the lives of the innocent. But time and time again, Cooper had the opportunity to simply take the money and walk away. If he chose not to, he chose to kill people he just didn't need to kill, and he did this on more than one occasion. The first time might have been down to a simple rush of blood to the head, and to genuine possibility that killing the security guard was not part of Cooper's plans. But there's also a possibility that killing him proved to be something of a thrill. The thrill that Cooper wanted to replicate, and executing the 3 Starbucks workers. There's no doubt that locking up killers like Carl Cooper for the rest of their lives makes the world a safer place. The only worry is that there are many more out there just like him. People who've escaped justice for horrific crimes are those who have the same darkness in them, just waiting to boil over. To give some context, every summer I would do some temp work for the company where my dad worked. It was an education company, so they always needed temp workers around in July and August time for all of the exam remarks that they had come in. It was my data entry work, but it suited me fine, and that meant I could earn a little extra cash while I was at university. I did this every summer from when I was 19 through when I was 23. And then I got another job at the same company for a bit after I graduated, but we'll get to that later. For now, all you need to know is that I was a reasonably familiar face there, and everybody knew I was my dad's daughter. The main downside of working there was that I'd clock off work at 5 p.m., but I'd have to wait for my dad to finish work since he was the head of an entire department, so he'd end up staying a bit later. Every day, I bring a book with me and sit in this little foyer area between his department and the department where I worked, since it had the most comfortable chairs. I must have been 22 years old when this happened, because it was the penultimate summer that I worked there. I had just had my hair cut short for the first time in my life, and I'd had it dyed red as well. I was sitting on these couches reading, when all of a sudden, this guy approaches me. Leon. Leon tells me that he works in my dad's department, and he thought he'd come introduce himself. This is a pretty common occurrence for me, and I was aware of this guy. He was young and decent looking, so a few of the women in my department had a crush on him. I was dating someone at the time though, and I'd never actually seen him in person, but I could see what they saw in him. He got to chatting, and he mentioned that I changed my hair, so I told him about cutting it short, and he cut me off mid-sentence. As this is where it started to get weird. He said, no, first it was brown and you didn't have a fringe, and then you went through that phase of curling it. Then you put the fringe in its indicted red. After that, you dyed it purple, and now you had to cut short and dye it back to red. This guy I just met was describing over 2 years worth of hairstyle changes that I'd had. I felt creeped out, but it seemed like a nice enough guy. And I guess I'd worked at the company throughout the entire time, so it was reasonable to assume that he'd noticed me before, and that should have been the first red flag. He asked me if I had Facebook, and I told him that I did, so he said that he would add me. That seemed pretty normal. But then, after he'd sent the friend request, he asked me to get my phone out so he could watch me accept the friend request. I'm British, and it's therefore impossible for me to be impolite. So I got my phone out and showed him that I had accepted it. I thought that might calm him down. Bear in mind,
He wasn't a bad-looking guy, so I felt a bit flattered at this point that he was so keen on me. Then, sense of flattery dissolved real fast. After the Facebook thing, he kept asking me if I had MSN, and I told him that I didn't. I swear throughout this conversation, he asked me if I had MSN about 4 times. Then the final time, he was like, "Please, can you get MSN Messenger so we can chat after work?" It was like he had something really urgent he wanted to tell me, but I'd only just met this person. I kinda laughed and said how I hadn't used MSN since I was a teenager without necessarily rejecting him. Then he said something like, "Well, if you don't have MSN, then you have Skype." This seemed like the perfect opportunity to bring up my boyfriend who was a foreign student and went back to his home country during the summer. He was the only person I spoke to on Skype. I said to Leon how I didn't have my own Skype account, but I used my dad's Skype account to talk to my boyfriend. I really thought this might ward them off. I was wrong. Without missing a beat, he said, "Can you please just get your own Skype account so we can video chat after work?" He said it like I somehow was inconveniencing him, like this was something we'd agreed to do months ago or something. I had no idea how to react, so I just sort of smiled and laughed. Thank the heavens someone from my dad's department walked past at the moment, was like, "Leon, are you meant to be at your desk?" He scurried off pretty quickly after that, but not before reminding me to get my own Skype account and sent him the details. I told my dad about the whole exchange in the car ride home, but all he said was that Leon was very friendly and that a lot of women in his department liked him. So maybe I just misunderstood the situation. I thought he was probably right, so I tried not to let it bother me. Later that evening, however, I was on my computer doing university work when a message popped up on my face. Look, it was Leon on the message. Said was, "We like the same movies." I don't know what it was, but something about this message freaked me out so much, I decided not to respond and logged off Facebook, hoping that he would notice I had been online. The next day after work, I was sat in my usual spot when Leon comes over to me. His face was like thunder. At first, I thought he was having a bad day and was walking through the hallway, but my heart dropped when I realized he was walking directly towards me. "Why don't you respond to your Facebook message?" I was stunned. How was I supposed to respond to that? Who says stuff like that in real life? Lucky for me, I didn't have an opportunity to respond because he started off on this tirade. I'm not even kidding. He started listing all of the movies we had in common, and then he had seen on my Facebook profile Batman, The Dark Knight, Watchmen, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, Fight Club. I just sat there watching him reel off all of these film titles. Once he was finished, all he said was, "It's okay, I forgive you," and then walked off back to his department. Over the next couple of weeks, he came and found me in my spot every day and talked to me, from the moment I sat down to the moment my dad came to get me. I don't remember many of the exchanges, but I do remember distinctly one day pretending to pick up my nose when I saw him coming to see if it would pull him off. It didn't. I got to the point where I'd get so stressed out after work that I'd go and hide in the toilets for as long as I could, but the women I worked with started to notice and think I was weird. Eventually, I broached the subject with my dad, and he gave me his car keys after my shift so I could go hide out in the car rather than the building. So I'm camping out in his car, and I'm still feeling quite tense. But after about 20 minutes, I start to feel at ease. Surely he won't come looking for me out here. Wrong. I looked over at the main entrance, and my heart drops. He is coming out of the door, and he's scrutinizing all the cars. I sank down as far as possible into my seat, but I wasn't fast enough, and he saw me. He comes rushing off and starts tapping the glass, so I open the door and ask him what's up. "I didn't see you in your usual spot, but luckily the doorman told me he saw you come out here. Why are your dad's car? Again? What am you supposed to say to that?" I told him I had a headache, so I'd come out to the car to take some Persimenthol and see if I could get some sleep. At least he respected that because he told me to feel better and left me alone. I breathed a sigh of relief, knowing that I was only going to be working there for a few more days before I had to go back to university. I told my dad about the car incident, and he gave Leon a talking to the next day. Leon would still come find me in the foyer, but he'd only talk to me for a few minutes in passing before leaving me alone, and there was a big relief. On my last day at work there, I was fully expecting him to do something crazy, but he didn't even come to chat with me that day. I left the office and thought that I would never see him again. I found out he was fired not long after I left the company that year because he kept coming into work late and then spent most of his time at work chatting with his coworkers and me apparently. Fast forward to January of 2014, and I was preparing to move to China for a position teaching English. I graduated from university and I was working at the same company, but this time in a semi-permanent capacity. It was my last day of work, so I received quite a few gifts and some fuss from my coworkers. It was about 10 a.m. when who should I see walk through the door but Leon. He had been hired as a temp to do the job that I had done for so many years. As soon as he walked through the door, he saw me and this flash of recognition crossed his face. I wanted to slide under my desk and die. It came walking over me and was all smiles, asking about how I was and why I was still doing at the company. I was at the point that one of my coworkers mentioned how I was off to China soon. Leon seized on that and started talking about his friend who was also interested in TFL. His interest seemed genuine, so I got to talk about how I got my TFL qualification, who I got it through, what company I would be working with for on China, etc., etc. We chatted for about 20 minutes and he wrote down some details for his friend and went off to work. At the end of the day, I was packing all my stuff to leave and a few of my coworkers were coming over to say their goodbyes. Don't get me wrong, the Leon incident aside, I had a wonderful time working at that time. Company and I had made a lot of great friends out of the corner. My eyes see Leon approaching, but I think, what's the harm? He says goodbye and wishes me luck on my new adventure. Then, as I'm literally walking out the door of the department, I hear him call out, "See you in China." For the first 2 weeks of my teacher training over there, I was like a hawk, keeping a constant lookout for this guy. He never did follow me out to China, but it still remains one of the creepiest encounters of my life.
I got a few work-related stories from my hometown I can post. This first one happened when I was a 20-year-old college student. At the time, I worked in a, let's say, rustic-looking gas station. It wasn't a building by itself either. Rather, it acted more like a booth that was attached to a supermarket. The booth itself is located a bit off-site on the other side of this huge parking lot, but the supermarket owns it. The booth faces the store, but it has a huge woodland area directly behind it. The door to the booth faces left into the woods, and I know I'm being overly specific, but this is important. So the window in the booth is bulletproof, but only covers the front so you can't see directly to the left or right of the booth. At the time of this experience, I'd been working at the station for maybe a few months, when all of a sudden, this nasty storm hit the area one night. The rain was so bad that you could barely see 10 feet in front of you, and it was flooding all over the place. But the supermarket, being desperate for money, refused to close the booth down, so I showed up for my typical 5 to 11 p.m. shift in the pouring rain. 3 hours into my shift, the power goes out due to the storm, which by this point has gotten downright apocalyptic. It's pitch black out there, and the rain is coming down hard, so I decided to sit tight in the booth while I wait for a manager or something to either let me go or to fix the power. Of course, this means the phones are down, so I can't call in the store, and nobody in their right mind is buying gas, so I decided to start doing my booth chores like cleaning the counter, counting cigarettes, tidying the drawer, etc. Now, this next part will require a bit more background information, so bear with me. The booth itself is supposed to be locked at all times, but one of the new hires managed to break the key off inside the lock, making one of our managers break the lock so we all could get back inside. That lock still hadn't been replaced, but we were told to pretend the door was still locked. The door still had a deadbolt, but I found it annoying to fool with, so I mostly just left it unlocked. Whenever I'd go to open the door, I'd pretend to put the key in and make an audible ksh sound like a lock being opened. Anyway, back to me sitting in the unlocked booth in the pitch-black pouring rain. I'm in the middle of my chores when I hear something outside the booth, like a muffled sort of splashing sound. Again, there is zero visibility, so I press my ear against the door and I can clearly hear someone walking around the booth, in the rain, before stopping in front of the door. Before I can kick myself for not locking it, I hear that ksh sound, followed by the most dreadfully quiet couple of seconds. I'm just waiting to die at the hands of some deranged serial killer or crackhead, when suddenly, the footsteps start splashing back into the woods. I quietly soil myself as I race to lock the deadbolt and I wait out my shift. I would occasionally hear the footsteps outside, but it never tried to open the door. Finally, my manager drives over in a truck to close me out for the night. Since I'm still kind of new here, I didn't want to seem like I was delusional or crazy or that I was a crackhead, so I never mentioned it to him or anyone else at the store. A few months later, this kid I was training told me he'd heard footsteps real late one night during a storm, and thankfully, the lock had been replaced since then. I just tell him it was nothing, but not to open the door if he thinks there is something out there. Not because I didn't want to look delusional, but because I can't explain this phenomenon. Now fast forward a couple of months, and I'm still working at the booth. By this point, I'm the second oldest person working there, so sometimes I'd get calls from younger coworkers when they accidentally mess up. On this particular night I was off, but I still got a call from this high schooler who I'll call Rhea. I look at the time and it's 9:30, so I sigh and pick up the phone, and before I can even get in a "what happened," Rhea is in hysterics, saying something about her trainee being missing, and then lots of sobbing. Confused, if not a little agitated that she called me first, I try to get her to call the cops or something if he's been kidnapped, but she insists that she can't call the cops because they wouldn't believe her. So, my next line of thinking is to ask her why she hasn't told a manager, and she cries some more and says that they wouldn't understand. More agitated than confused, I agreed to go out there and calm her down. I get dressed, go out there, and park next to the booth. There were no customers around, and the girl was just standing in the booth, staring at the door. She spots me, opens the door, and starts sobbing, telling me to hurry inside. Eventually, I got her to stop crying long enough to tell me what happened. Apparently, she was training this new guy, Matt, who was an older guy about my age, and she said, the dude felt off, like a robot or something, and kept staring at her all dazed. Several times he would stop talking mid-sentence and ignored her attempts to address it. At this point, she's getting real uncomfortable and is about to call into the store about him when he starts sort of humming, she says. She described it as kind of like as if someone was attempting to imitate a purring cat, like they were breathing heavily and buzzing at the same time. So she reaches for the phone, and he reacts by grabbing her hand and just staring at her. She starts bawling at this point, begging him to stop, and he lets go of her hand, then opens the door, and just sprints off into the woods out of sight. She said he came back a few minutes just before I got there and asked to be let back in, but she refused, so he just ran back into the woods. At this point, I'm either thinking he picked up on the meth phase that the neighborhood was slinging around or that she's being dramatic. Regardless, the story sounded pretty dangerous and we needed to call the cops or something at least. I tell her we're going to call the cops and then we're going to walk outside and wait for them, but she doesn't want to go outside. She says that she can almost feel him waiting out there. Tired, irritated, and not really buying the story, I just say screw it. She can stay in the booth and call the cops while I make sure the tree line is clear. I take this weak little flashlight that I stashed out there after the first story and go outside to start scanning the tree line. I barely begin shining the light around when suddenly the hair stands up on the back of my neck as I hear this humming noise. She described it rather well too, because it sounded kind of like cicadas mixed with breathing. I look inside the booth and she's curled up in the chair, staring to my left. I didn't even look where she was staring, I just immediately booked it back to get inside. But I left the keys with her, and she's not getting up to let me in. I'm pounding on the door while screaming at her to let me in, and the humming stops abruptly as I hear something behind me and to the left. It's Matt. He's standing just on the edge of the trees. My panic intensifies, and at this point, Rhea finally lets me into the booth, and I immediately deadbolt the thing shut. All of a sudden, Matt is right outside asking to be let back in. He says he's sorry, and that he got a bit nervous back there, and he begins circling the booth while he just repeats the same couple of excuses, asking to come in. This continues for maybe 5 minutes before the cops arrive, and Matt just begins to run off into the woods again. I end up having to explain to both the cops and our manager what happened, leaving out the weird humming. As far as I know, Matt never showed up, so they fired him and Rhea quit eventually, and that was the end of it. I was never particularly close to Rhea since she was still in high school when I was in college, so we never got to talk about what happened. I have no idea what happened that night, though. Maybe Matt was just some doped-up meth junkie who was capable of making some really weird noises. I'll never know. I guess it could explain why he bolted out of there when the cops began to show up, but that day is still quite a mystery to my mind.
My mom travels a lot as part of her job, so she stayed in a whole bunch of different hotels. So she's on short flight from New York City to Toronto. And she gets talking to a guy who's in a similar kind of job, only he's actually from Toronto and had been visiting Manhattan on business. Mom thinks she can swoop in and undercut the deal he was getting, earning a bunch of kudos from her bosses in the process. So she gives this guy her business card and tells him to call her. They land and they say goodbye, and my mom heads off to her hotel for the evening. A few hours later, she's almost ready for bed when she gets a call from the hotel lobby saying my dad was there to surprise her, and would it be okay if they gave him a copy of her room key? Mom hadn't been expecting him, and the way she tells it, she was actually kind of angry that he'd apparently left a 6-year-old me with a sitter when I'd just gotten over chicken pox. So she calls to be like, "What are you doing, Paul?" Only my dad has no idea what she's talking about. He was at home taking care of me. And she could even hear me over the line to confirm if she tells Dad she'll call him back. And then heads down to the lobby to see when the world is going on. And who should it be waiting in the lobby pretending to be my dad? The guy she gave the business card to. As you can imagine, she was both freaked out and very angry. But she calmly explains to the concierge that the guy was not her husband, and that if he turned her again, he was to call the cops. The guy tried to play all innocent, acting like he was just picking up the wrong vibes from her or whatever. But he could have called her, he could have asked the reception to call her. There were a million different things he could have done if he thought she was just looking for some little work trip affair. She didn't do any of that. They just tried to talk his way into getting himself a freaking room key, presumably hoping he could catch my mom sleeping. Obviously, my mom was in no mood to sleep after the little encounter, and she remembers that she has a copy of this guy's business card too. She couldn't exactly call the cops, and the guy since he hadn't actually committed any crime. But she could contact the company he worked for to maybe get him fired for being such a creep. But when she calls the number on the card, she discovers it's a dead number, and the company that's listed on the card that she eventually was able to get a hold of never even heard of the guy in question. The guy gave her a fake card, presumably just to get hers. He was never in the same business as her, but the fact that he managed to talk a good enough game to convince her is incredibly creepy to me. Like, there's only one thing scarier than an evil psychopath predator, and that's a smart one. Luckily, my mom was able to fly back the following afternoon after a business meeting, but it was definitely a close call, and I thank God she was able to get away safely.
September 2008. A woman walks into a New York City branch of the coffee chain Starbucks. Her name is Hannah Up, and like all other customers, her presence is recorded on the small number of CCTV cameras that are present in the store. Yet when asked her name so it can be written on the side of her cup, Hannah doesn't give her real name. But not out of any kind of duplicitousness. You see, Hannah doesn't realize who she is. In fact, the young woman seemed to have forgotten herself entirely. Hannah grew up in Oregon, the daughter of 2 Methodist ministers. As a result of their parents' profession, Hannah spent a great deal of her youth in a handful of predominantly Japanese American churches in her native state, where her parents both served as pastors. The family shared a deep connection with the Japanese migrant community, to the point where Hannah's mother, Barbara, spoke fluent Japanese after spending a few years teaching in Kyoto. Hannah had a mostly healthy and happy relationship with her parents, but obviously, both were rigid in their religious beliefs. This made it difficult for Hannah to communicate the fact that, as she grew older, she found herself more attracted to some of the other girls at school, rather than her male counterparts. This quite possibly motivated her to relocate to the much more liberal New York City after her graduation from the Pennsylvania Seven Sisters College in 2007. It was there that she funded the pursuit of her master's degree by working as a teacher, all the while volunteering for a charity that provided assistance to those suffering from HIV and AIDS. She was highly intelligent, outgoing, and by all accounts had a great sense of humor, so she was spoken highly of by all that had the good fortune to know her. At age 23, Hannah transferred to a middle school in Harlem named the Thurgood Marshall Academy. She was reportedly very excited at the posting and felt it gave her a chance to make a real difference among some of the city's most vulnerable youth. On the first day of classes in September of 2008, Hannah didn't show up to work, and it quickly became obvious that she had vanished. The disappearance of a beloved middle school teacher quickly became a high-profile case among local and national media outlets. Hannah's face was on almost every local news channel, all of which asked the public for any and all information related to her disappearance. These efforts were reinforced by scores of Hannah's friends and former classmates who canvassed New York City with thousands of leaflets and flyers in the hopes that it might generate some clues. From what law enforcement could gather, Hannah left her downtown apartment on a jog that she never returned from. Yet 10 days later, Hannah's Apple ID was used at an NYC Apple store. Police had employees pull up the relevant CCTV footage, feeling a great deal of relief that the tape showed Hannah to be alive and well. However, the employees had something rather disturbing to report. Although the woman in the footage was quite obviously Hannah Up, when approached by an old high school friend, Hannah apparently denied being herself altogether. Hey, Hannah, it's me. Are you alright? Everyone's looking for you." But instead of offering an explanation for her disappearance, Hannah apparently responded with, "Excuse me, my name isn't Hannah." The Apple Store employee later said that Hannah's response seemed frustrated, like it wasn't the first time that day where someone had approached her in such a way. The interaction seemed to have irritated Hannah so much that she walked away from the man and out of the store entirely. It was then that she made her way to the aforementioned branch of Starbucks and then onto a nearby gym, where it's assumed that she worked out and showered. Investigators were hot on Hannah's trail but couldn't quite seem to catch up with her. Despite the bizarre, forgetful episode, she seemed to be taking care of herself and wasn't acting in a self-destructive manner, which is why it was so confusing for investigators when members of the New York Harbor Police pulled her out of the Hudson in a severely dehydrated state, with absolutely no memory of the previous few weeks. She once again knew who she was, but offered no explanation for the events of the previous few weeks, nor her disappearance. After a few days' worth of recovery in a New York hospital, doctors declared that the most likely explanation for Hannah's bizarre episode was what was known as a dissociative fugue. In a dissociative fugue, people lose some or all memories of their past, and they usually disappear from their usual environments, leaving their family and job. The word fugue comes from the Latin words for flight and flee. The condition is sometimes given the playful nickname of Jason Bourne syndrome, in reference to the movies about a CIA agent suffering from a dissociative fugue who remembers nothing but his extensive training. Many of those who experience dissociative fugue states do so because they have suffered from a tremendous amount of trauma. But Hannah's mother later insisted that her fugue episodes don't appear to have any clear or obvious triggers, and when asked, Hannah could not recall any traumatizing events she had endured. The family even paid for an intense hypnotherapy session in which a trained hypnotist attempted to unearth any buried trauma or memories that may be affecting Hannah on a subconscious level. Yet after zero progress was made after numerous appointments, the hypnotherapist was baffled, and nothing in the way of trauma could be discovered. People have been known to not only travel across cities or countries, but also across continents, said Professor Emeritus of Psychiatry at Indiana University. The explanation behind the fugue is that the person is running away from a bad situation, from a bad marriage or a bad financial situation. According to numerous news outlets, one of Hannah's close friends made an attempt to discuss the 2008 fugue with Hannah, but said she often just sat in silence, almost like she was completely unable to talk about it. It felt like the words we have in the English language were not sufficient to describe this. This friend later added, and we can only imagine her frustration at her dear friend being unable to properly articulate what had happened. The following year, Hannah sat down with a reporter in a coffee shop and once again attempted to describe her terrifying ordeal in her own words, and this is what she said. It goes from, like, going to a run to, like, being in the ambulance. For me, that was like 10 minutes past, but in reality, it was more like 3 weeks. The hardest part is the period right after. You feel shame, and you feel embarrassed, or you feel guilt. All things that I've definitely felt. It's weird. How do you feel guilty for something you didn't even know you did? It's not your fault, but it's still somehow you. So it's definitely made me reconsider everything. Who was I before? Who was I then? Is that part of me? Who am I now? My roommates and I have a code word to show that I'm not going to fugue again, Hannah went on to say. My roommate had done this long interview with ABC, and the only thing they ended up printing was that I was a friendly vegetarian who likes to try new dishes. So if I don't get home one night, they'll text me like, friendly vegetarian, and I'll reply with, who likes to try new dishes, so we know we're on the same page. In early 2010, Hannah left her life in New York behind, moving to Philadelphia for a few months while she worked at a Quaker study retreat named Pendle Hill. It was here that she met a young man by the name of Patrick Rosal, and the pair had dated for a while before Hannah shared the story of her fugue episode with him. Being the good-natured soul that he was, Patrick didn't seem to be bothered by the revelation and considered it a freak accident. The way I see it, Patrick later said, Hannah gives so much to other people that at a certain point there is literally nothing left, and she departs from herself. Hannah spent a few years in Philly before again moving on, this time to Maryland in September of 2013. But it's here that she experienced yet another bout of dissociative fugue that lasted 2 days. She suddenly came to when she found herself sitting in a creek with a shopping cart beside her. But despite the confusing and terrifying experience, she noticed a kind of trend that linked her fugue episodes together. 1, they tended to happen at the start of the school year. 2, her pattern of behavior tended to focus around wandering whichever city she was living in. And 3, she always came out of her fugue when in contact with a body of water. With these in mind, Hannah quickly decided to move somewhere with plenty of water where she couldn't roam too far or into anything too dangerous. So in 2014, Hannah got herself a job as a teaching assistant in the U.S. Virgin Islands, moving to the island of St. Thomas where she embraced a new life and new friends. By all accounts, Hannah loved her new life on the island and found working with preschoolers to be extremely rewarding. Then, days after a Category 5 hurricane and days before yet another one, Hurricane Irma and Maria, friends noticed something was off. She seemed super out of it. They described her as being almost in a trance. On yet another beautiful September day, 32-year-old Hannah Emily Upp disappeared again. On September 14, 2017, she told her roommates she was headed over to the Montessori school to help them prepare for the incoming hurricanes. She got in their car and was never seen again. Despite desperate searches for local homeless shelters, beaches, hospitals, and even the morgue, Hannah was nowhere to be found. But given how she always seemed to turn up or reassociate whenever coming into contact with water, the cops figured it was only a matter of time before she showed up. In an attempt to intercept her before she endangered herself, police searched for Hannah around the island's marina, asking various ship captains and crew members if they'd seen an American girl exhibiting any unusual behavior. None had, but it was at one of these marinas, Sapphire Beach to be specific, that the cops found Hannah's abandoned car. Inside were a number of her personal items, such as passport and purse, which contained a few $100 in cash. Nearby was a small beach bar that served burgers and beer locals and tourists alike. It was there that Hannah's sarong, sundress, and sandals were found, neatly folded on a bar stool as if she planned to return to them to collect them after swimming. Terrified that Hannah has drowned, the Coast Guard sent 3 helicopters to search for her, while Hannah's friends checked the manifests of people evacuated from the island on mercy ships. But again, not a single trace of her was ever located, and the search for her unearthed far more questions than answers. The only logical explanation was that Hannah had gone to take a swim, gotten caught in a strong current, and then drowned. But if Hannah had drowned, her body would likely float to the surface within a few days. An emergency medical technician named Jacob Bradley circled the island in a rescue boat for hours on end in the days that followed, but again, no sign of the missing teacher was ever found. He even paid a visit to the St. Thomas morgue, as well as several others on the surrounding islands. All in all, he inspected 10 different drowning victims, and none were Hannah. The situation progressed to the point that Hannah's mother, Barbara Upp, moved out to St. Thomas to organize and aid in the search for her daughter. Her move came just after a devastating hurricane, and doubtless this hampered the effort to locate Hannah, either living or dead. It has never been an option to give up. Hope is persistent, and many people join me in that hope, Barbara later said. I've heard from many people here that it's very, very rare for people to drown while swimming, and then when they do, the bodies are found relatively quickly. This has been affirmed by local law enforcement who confess to being stumped by the mystery of Hannah's disappearance. But still, they're inclined to go with the most logical explanation, while Hannah's mother is on the record as saying, "I don't think she went out into the water. Everything that goes out comes back this way. She'd have washed up quickly." Hannah seems to be one of the rare missing person cases where even the most logical explanation has glaring holes in it. For all intents and purposes, Hannah waded in the Caribbean Sea that day, slipping beneath the waves, never to return. To avoid detection by the Coast Guard and EMTs in their search boats, Hannah's body would have to have been dragged along the seabed for miles on end, and even then, it would have floated back to land eventually thanks to the rather predictable currents of the Caribbean Sea. It would be folly to ascribe Hannah's disappearance to supernatural means, but it's difficult not to imagine the terrifying eldritch fates that might lead a troubled young woman to disappear once and for all, even after years of fighting to contain her psychological disorder. For years, the public had focused on the question of who took Hannah up. But in reality, a much more pertinent question might well be, what took Hannah up? Last night, my boyfriend and I were driving home from Universal Studios in Orlando. We were rerouted a way home we've never went before, and we're traveling in basically the middle of nowhere. My boyfriend's speedometer is broken in his car, and he has to press the button to reset the miles after he gets gas, and this will be very important soon. We were driving on a deserted road in the middle of absolute nowhere with not one car in sight. My boyfriend realized we hit the 130-mile mark on his odometer. We needed gas, but there was literally not one gas station in sight. I put search gas stations nearby, and we found one. It turned out to be closed. In a hurry, we found another gas station 5 minutes up the road, and this is where the story gets weird. My boyfriend thought that he closed his gas cap and we were once again driving along this deserted road. We heard a loud bang and he realized he forgot to put the gas cap back on, so we were driving around this dark road looking for the gas cap. He finally pulls over and realized somehow the gas cap is still attached to the car. We get back on track to the other gas station. Out of nowhere, I had this horrible thought about something going wrong at that gas station. I pushed it aside because I knew we needed gas and AAA is not an option where we were at the moment. We get to this gas station, the lights are kind of on. This road literally leads to a dead end, and with a gas station on it, the only way to leave this area was to turn left or go straight out of the gas station. My boyfriend got out of the car to see if we could get gas, and the feeling intensified. I have literally never felt like that in my life. My stomach dropping into my butt. I've been in very disturbing situations, such as almost being kidnapped twice, being followed home, watching someone being taken away in a body bag after being hit by a car, and even a paranormal situation. I can talk about these sometime in the future, but I had never felt like this before. I saw a white car pulling up the road to make a left. Keep in mind there is literally no one on this road. He pulls up and notices my boyfriend, and backs up with his windows down. I found this very strange because my boyfriend has a very nice sports car, and my mind immediately went into panic mode. I started screaming his name, and the man realized that someone else was in the car, myself, and turned left and sped off. Sadly, I didn't get his license plate because of how dark it was. This situation frightened me more than you can even imagine. It may not seem too scary, but it was easily one of the most terrifying things to watch because I didn't know if I was going to witness my boyfriend being robbed at gunpoint or something like that. The feeling and thought I had just 10 minutes earlier is what also made the situation even worse. I found a gas station with actual human life around, and we made it home safe and sound. Once I got home, my dad told me that the road we were driving on was famous for the many bodies being found on it. I hope no one ever gets put into the situation, and to the man who was planning to do something to my boyfriend, let's hope you never get away with it.
So this story takes place back in the early 2000s. I can't quite remember the exact year. It was late December, and Christmas was just right around the corner. My family tries to spend every other Christmas together, and we rotate on whose house will host the entire family. This year, it was my mother's turn. It was dinner time, and as you can imagine, with so many people in one house, it can get pretty crowded at the table. Most everyone decided that we're going to eat in the living room. Sometimes my mother didn't mind considering the fact that our kitchen table only sat, for I was sitting at the table next to my aunt with my small body. It was easy for me to sit on one side of the table with her. I had just stuck a large piece of broccoli on my fork and attempted to shove the vegetables in my mouth, when it fell off my fork, landing in the cup of juice that I'd been drinking. I was disappointed, but the most rational thing in my mind, I got up with the intention of dumping out the drink in the sink. But before I could move, my aunt stopped me, questioning as to what I thought I was doing. I told her what happened and showed her the broccoli that was quickly starting to break apart in my drink. I turned to go dump the cup down the sink when my aunt stopped me again, telling me not to be wasteful and fish out the broccoli and drink the juice. I laughed, thinking she was joking, telling her, "You crazy," in a joking manner. But she didn't take it that way. Oh boy, did she not take it that way at all. My aunt went eerily quiet, and her face goes blank. I can instantly feel a cold chill run up my spine, and honestly had felt like I had stepped on a landmine. My aunt tells me in a low tone, "Don't call me crazy." My smile had long been wiped away, and I tried my best to backpedal, explaining to her that I didn't think that she was actually crazy, that it was just a playful spin on words. This didn't go over well either, because she grabbed my arm and leaned in closer, repeating, "Don't call me crazy." I instantly know that if I don't apologize, something bad would happen. So I quickly apologized to her, and that seemed to satisfy her. She made me sit down and hovered over me until I ate the now extremely soggy broccoli and chugged down the cup of juice. Now, This might not seem terrifying or scary at all. Well, that was just the setup for the events that were to follow that evening. Later that night, most of my family had gone out. I can't remember where, but the only people in the house were myself, my older sister, my aunt, and her daughter, my second eldest cousin. I was sitting in my room watching TV when I started to hear yelling from the remover. It quickly got louder, and I knew it was my aunt and cousin. I'm not sure what it started the whole thing, but I do know why it had escalated the way it did. The two were having an argument over something, when my cousin told my aunt she was acting crazy, as she did the same thing I had done earlier. But unlike me, my cousin didn't apologize. She tried to explain to her as I did, but just like before, she wasn't having any of that, and my aunt exploded. I'm sitting in my room terrified when I hear a loud bang from the wall causes me to jump. After the bang came my cousin's screams of pure terror. I was too scared to move until I heard Russian footsteps. I look at my door and soon see my sister running by. Next thing I know, I can hear my aunt screaming and ranting at the top of her lungs, my sister pleading and begging her to stop, and the psalms my cousin along with a loud thud noise. I finally get enough courage to leave my room and look into the next room. And what I saw was an image seared in my mind to this day. My cousin was on the bed in the fetal position, trying to make herself as small as possible, just sobbing. She cried so much that she left a large wet spot on the bedspread. My sister's laying on top of her, using her own body as a shield, and my aunt is hovering over the two, just screaming like a mad woman, and in her hand is one of her shoes. It was one of those women loafers with a light sole and slight heel. She was using the shoe to beat both my sister and cousin, swinging away trying to make contact with any amount of skin. She was really just trying to get my cousin, but didn't care that she was hitting my sister in the process. I'm frozen in absolute fear, never having seen anything like this before. Sure, Mother got mad at me and I got the occasional spanking, but nothing like this. I'm afraid to even say anything and fear that my aunt will turn on me and start attacking me. I slowly start to back away when I look to the ground. That caused my eyes to widen. On the floor was my sister's jewelry box. It was all wood and had magnetic drawers to prevent the jewelry from spilling out if you knocked it over. It was just laying on the round, all the drawers open, and jewelry spilled on the floor. I looked at the box, then to my aunt, and quickly figured out what that loud banging noise I heard earlier was. Yes, my aunt had thrown my sister's jewelry box at my cousin. Luckily, my cousin dodged it and hit the wall, but she had thrown it with so much force that it caused all the magnetic drawers to pop open. That's when I truly realized my aunt had lost it. I turned and ran back in my room, locking the door behind me, waiting for my mom to come home. I wasn't old enough to have a cell phone, and we didn't have a house phone, so there was no one I could call. I stayed in my room until the shouting stopped. Turns out, my aunt had just gotten tired of hitting and yelling, so she went outside to smoke. My sister hugged my cousin, comforting her until everyone else got home. What bothers me most is that the entire incident was just brushed off. No one said anything to my aunt, nor reprimanded her for her behavior. I think my aunts had made it all seem not like a big deal when my cousin deserved it, and so did my sister for defending her cousin when she was in the wrong. She was believed over us because we were kids and she was the adult. I know this isn't really as scary or terrifying as what other people have experienced, but of all the messed up things that have occurred in my life, this had one of the bigger impacts. I can't even look at my aunt without thinking about it. I will say this. My family is finally starting to recognize the true person my aunt is, that her so-called discipline was actually abuse. They refuse to condone her behavior anymore, especially my mother. Despite the fact that I'm an adult now, my aunt still scares me. But at least now, I have my family to back me up.
I'm a DJ here in South Korea, and because English is not my first language, please excuse me if there are any mistakes here. 20 years ago, I was driving home from a late-night wedding gig. It was around 4:30 a.m., and I was driving south on our equivalent of an interstate highway, when at one point, the retaining walls on each side of the highway grew very narrow due to the road snaking through mountain passes and other tunnel-like places. It's not like a particularly dangerous place to drive, but the blind bends definitely made me a little nervous as I slowed down to traverse them. Good job I did too, because suddenly, out of nowhere, a young woman jumped out in front of my car, and I was forced to slam on the brakes hard. I swear I almost gave myself whiplash, but I managed to stop in time, and I was so angry that I got out of my car to shout at her. What was she even thinking that she was doing? She looked up at me, didn't say a word in reply, then actually ran to the passenger side door and climbed into my car. It was then that I realized that she was evidently running from someone or something. So I freaked out for a second and as many minutes, then jumped back into my car and drove off. I kept asking her, "Are you okay? Who's chasing you?" But she only ever replied with, "I'm sorry, I just need to call my mom. I just need to call my mom." She looked to be in her late teens, with dyed blonde hair and dirty clothes that made it look like she tripped a few times while escaping an attacker. I told her it was okay, that I'd drive her somewhere so she could call her parents, but I couldn't get a straight answer out of her because she was panicking and crying. We'd both seen the figure in my rearview mirror as we drove away. It caused her to scream out, which made me speed up. I thought she might calm down a little so she could tell me what was going on, but she was terrified and just kept saying I need to call Mom whenever she calmed down enough to talk. I know what you're thinking. Why didn't she just use a cell phone? Well, this was a time when not everyone in South Korea could afford cell phones. They were in the market, sure, but to buy even a terrible one would require at least middle-class salaries, so I had to wait until I saw a 24-hour gas station to find anywhere the girl could use the phone. I asked her if she needed any change to use the payphones, but she just looked up at me and said the same thing. I just need to call Mom. I think that's when I realized that something wasn't right. It was literally the only thing she said to me for the entire ride, and when we stopped, she just got out and ran into the grocery store. It was very evident that she was terrified of whoever had been following her, and it was also evident that they were too scared to talk about it, so, trying to be a good citizen, I called the police and told them everything. I kept the car running and kept watching the girl as she used the payphone. The police dispatcher told me it would be around 10 minutes before the police arrived, and I was worried she'd freak out if she found out I'd called them. So, that was what was occupying my mind as I watched the girl put the phone down before she appeared to start walking back towards my car. Suddenly, she stopped, and she turned back towards the gas station as if she'd heard something around the corner of it, which was completely dark and not covered by any lights. I watched as she walked closer and closer towards it, almost like someone was calling her name into the darkness. Then, out of nowhere, I saw a man leap out of the darkness, grab her, then drag her back into it. I immediately put my foot down, zooming around to where she'd been grabbed so I can illuminate the darkness with my headlights. It was a matter of seconds, and I thought I'd see some predator trying to drag her behind a dumpster or something, but there was no one there. No one there at all. It actually took my breath away for a moment. There didn't seem to be anywhere for two people to disappear, just a chain-link fence and the rear of the gas station. So where had they gone? Before I got a chance to look any further, the police showed up, so I ran over to their car and frantically told them what I'd just seen. We searched the area completely. They even checked in the back room of the gas station, but there was no one fitting the description of the girl or the attacker. The police thanked me for filing the report, but told me that there was no longer any reason for me to be there. It was about 5:30 in the morning by that time, and adrenaline was starting to wear off, so I did as I was told and went home to sleep. Naturally, it wasn't the most peaceful sleep of my life, and my first thoughts when I awoke were that poor girl had been dragged into the shadows. And I never learned of her fate. Nothing was in the news about it, and when I contacted the police about it, they just told me it was under investigation. But the thing that I find really scary about the whole thing is how there was a man chasing her when she got into my car on the highway, and we must have driven at least 5 or 6 miles away from the scene. It couldn't have been the same guy who grabbed her, and there's no way of anyone knowing where we were headed. So how was someone able to find her at the gas station? Was it something to do with the phone call she made? I have so many unanswered questions about this event in my life, and sometimes I feel like it haunts me. I find myself scared of total strangers whose names I didn't even know, and as much as I hope she's okay, somewhere, and what happened was part of some horrible but brief chapter in her life, I have the worst feeling that she's not okay at all.
I was a bad kid. And now I'm not talking about your regular teenage delinquency, like trying cigarettes, school detention, or getting bad grades. I mean really bad. The age 17, I was shoplifting, stealing cars, getting picked up by cops for all sorts of things. Not exactly hurting anyone, but I was a constant headache for my mom and dad. Then after me and dad almost got into an actual fist fight, he kicked me out of the house. I knew I deserved it, and I knew they figured I'd just go stay with friends for a couple of days, because that's exactly what I did. But me being me, I quickly wore out my welcome in my buddies' houses and ran out of places to stay. But again, me being me, I was way too proud to just go home and apologize. Since it was summertime, I figured it'd be a good idea to head down to the park to find somewhere to sleep. Now I lived in the inner city back then, so there was a bunch of other actual homeless people already sleeping there. And as soon as I realized I was actually stuck out there for a night, I started to realize that this homeless thing wasn't a game anymore. As it started to get really late, I got to the park at around 11 p.m., and it was like 1 a.m. by the time this happened. One of the homeless dudes walked up to me as I started to bed down on the bench and started talking to me. He asked what I was doing, and being naive, I told him homelessness, immediately responding by saying, "No, you're not," and pretty much guessed the whole deal about me having a falling out with my mom and dad. I didn't want to admit that he was exactly right, so I just kept my mouth shut. But I remember him saying something like, "Really though, kid, if you have Ken, you need to pay him a visit because I promise you ain't ready for this life." My pride kept me out there for 3 whole nights, and every single time I caught up on that bench, the same old homeless dude would walk up and be like, "Go home, the sing you." In hindsight, he was exactly right. But at the time, he was just another person to prove wrong. My final night on the street, I also happened to be the first that I tried to integrate myself with the homeless folk who slept in the park, partially out of boredom and partially out of hunger. I'd run out of money, run out of food, and I figured if I hung out with the other guys, I could maybe get in on some of their food or something. I asked around, but no one had any spares until I asked this one guy, and he told me to buzz off, and I noticed a Snickers bar sticking out of his coat pocket. My rumbling stomach basically just overrode my brain, and with all the dexterity of a Victorian pickpocket, I slid the thing out of his pocket and walked off. Now my proudest moment stealing food from a homeless guy, when I could have just swallowed my pride and walked home,
but it is what it is. So I go off to hide somewhere so I can devour the Snickers hold, and I walk back to where the other guys are to hang out some more. Maybe like 2 or 3 hours later, I'm still trying to integrate myself with the homeless guys, but I'm also still pretty nervous about them for obvious reasons. I figured the guy I stole from is too drunk to even notice that I stole from him. But oh boy, was I wrong about that. Because like I said, a few hours after I stole it, I noticed the guy began to tap his coat pocket, obviously noticing that the candy bar is gone. I'm trying to remain inconspicuous, but I'm also trying to keep my eye on the guy, because if he put 2 and 2 together and worked out that it was me that stole from him, I wanted enough warning to be able to get out of there. So the guy taps his pocket when he stops. I can see the cogs turning in his booze-soaked brain, as I figured he was thinking pretty sure I had some candy in there. But then a few seconds later, he's back taking pulls from his 40 ancillary, had completely forgotten about the whole thing. Only he hadn't. And the most shocking thing about what came next was how he went from 0 to 100 in like a second flat. So remember that pool of his 40. He takes 1, then 2, then a third much larger one, almost like he was trying to polish the whole thing off in a hurry. Which, as it turned out, was exactly what he was doing, because what was once an innocent beverage receptacle soon became a weapon. When he turned to the guy to his right and sent the glass 40 bottles smashing into his face, the guy just collapsed, hands covering his face, some hands with muffled blood, curdling screams that he let out, and the guy I stole from then started kicking the lie. If I let him steal from me, mother effer. And then, of all the homeless people there, only one actually tried to break it up. And even then, it was just a slurred by breaking up over there, which ended up being totally ignored. I remember turning to the older dude had been nice to me, telling me to go home and whatnot, and I feigned ignorance. As I asked him what was going on, the guy said the dude getting beat down was always stealing stuff, so if anything went missing around the park, it was most probably his fault. No one cared though. No one gave single worry that this guy was getting his face stomped on, and it was all my fault. Oh, and I mean stomped on. I could hear this guy's face literally crunching under this guy's boot. I know I should have said something. I know I should have owned up. But believe me when I tell you that I've never been that scared. Not before or after. All I could think of was, if I tell the truth, that'd be my face getting stomped on, only he'll probably be like 100 times worse because, well, look what I cost. I turned to the nice guy and was like, what if he didn't steal it? What if someone else stole it? And the guy looked at me and his eyes went all wide and he leaned in and said, don't say a word, kid. Just leave. Leave and never ever come back. As I walked away, I could still hear the guy getting his buck beaten, although I never found out what happened to him. I don't see anyone being able to survive the kind of head injuries he got. A very same night, maybe at around 2 a.m., I walked back to my parents' house and banged on the front door until my dad woke up and answered. I just blurted out this big long apology about being a total idiot to not appreciate what I'd had. I'm pleased to say that now is the first step on the road of being a decent human being, because almost everything I did before that had little to no consequences, or rather, will little there were and bother me. But that night I sold the candy bar, I actually saw how bad the repercussions could be. And honestly, I had no idea that could ever be that bad. Just for taking a candy bar. I feel equal parts shame and horror when I look back on it. My pride and greed caused me to do something shameful, and my cowardice might have cost him a relatively innocent man's life. I wish it had never happened, but at the same time, If it didn't, who knows? I might be still hanging out in that park today, if I'd even been alive at all.
The secret of mine is that I've always wanted to SAS a customer as you read online. You know, the kind where a person asks to see the manager and the staff member does a flamboyant 180-degree spin and says, "That's me." I got to live that dream. Although that being said, I think it's nearly got me quite badly hurt too. A few years back, a customer had come into our branch of Starbucks an hour or so earlier and booked a table for his girlfriend and himself, and left some table decor he wanted to set the table up with. It seemed a little weird, but nevertheless, I offered to set up roses, LED candles, and cloth napkins for them so they could leave to get ready. I finished setting up the table when in walks Mr. Businessman. The store is basically empty at this point. It's 4:30 in the afternoon, too early for any sort of dinner rush, and so there are lots of tables free. Mr. Businessman walks up and asks to use the table clearly set up for a romantic night. I politely said it's been reserved, but there are many other tables he can take a seat at, but insists that he has that table. I take him to the table directly next to it and say this table is free, but he doesn't want that seat. He wants the reserved seat. He starts to raise his voice, and at that point, I can see he is choosing to be difficult for no other reason but to be difficult. I repeat myself, that table is reserved, and that's when he says it. He asks to see the manager. I feel the moment it spread through my whole body, starting from my suddenly beaming smile all the way to my fingertips and overworked feet. I feel the power I suddenly possess flow over me. This is it. This is my moment. I look around, then down at my name badge and gasp as it says manager under my name. I smile and say, "That's me, sir. I'm the manager." I was being awful and petty, and he's beyond angry at this point and raises his finger, stabbing the air around me and says, "What's your name? I'll be reporting you to head office." And that was honestly the least of my worries. Like, for a little while, I legitimately thought this guy was going to hurt me was honestly worth it. To make this guy so angry, this absolute psycho, to pay for my witty little comment with my health or life. I think I got very lucky because he leaves in an angry huff and says he'll be taking his business elsewhere. He ended up returning an hour later, and there's now a regular in our store. He greets me by my name every time he comes in.
In December of last year, I realized that because of a promotion I'd received during the summer, I was able to afford a new apartment. My old apartment had a bunch of chronic problems with it, and half of them were the kind of thing that I might have picked up on should I have given it a proper inspection beforehand. So when it came to shopping around for a new place, I was beyond thorough when it came to the kind of research I put in. After I admitted to asking an estate agent how thick the apartment door was, a friend of mine would kind of get on my case and say no landlord is ever going to offer you a tenancy. And in a way, he was right. But I found my approach only put off the dodgy landlords, while the decent ones completely understood why I was asking so many questions. Which is why when I actually found somewhere I liked, it made the experience way more stressful than exciting. I was competing with over 100 other applicants for the tenancy. It was these huge western-facing windows on the second floor too, meaning you get some incredible sunsets along with great spots for houseplants. And the shower, oh my god, the shower. Built-in waterproof Bluetooth speakers, stream jets, UV lights to stop bacteria from going anywhere. Okay, I'll quit flexing about my shower. And spoilers, I got the flat. But it's not like it gives me much joy anymore anyway. None of those amenities do anymore. And the only thing I put myself paying any serious attention to is the living room ceiling. Weird picture, isn't it? A guy just sitting there, drinking coffee, eating dinner, eyes glued to the black-white plaster above him. And I catch myself doing it an awful lot. A disturbing amount, actually. And now, I'll tell you why. Like I said, everything about this flat seemed perfect, and for the most part it was. But literally 8 days after I move in, right while I'm sitting quite confidently that everything was in working order, stuff hits the fan. I'm sitting on the couch watching TV, and the rain is just pelting against the windows. This horrible, cold December rain, the kind that makes it a kind of thrill hearing pattering against the glass. So I'm just chilling when I hear this tapping sound coming from down the hallway. I don't really think anything of it at first, like it honestly sounded like someone in the hallway outside the flat. But after a while, I decide to investigate because the sound just isn't ceasing. As I walk into the hall, I can tell almost right away that the tapping sound is coming from my bathroom, and when I open the door, I'm faced with this steady leak coming from the air vent in the ceiling. Just 8 days in. 8 freaking days, and I have a leak. Yes, it's only a minor one, but as anyone who's dealt with leaking pipes or dodgy plumbing might tell you, even the slightest amount of water can be absolutely catastrophic if a leak isn't dealt with right away. The water might pool somewhere out of reach, rotting wood and causing that disgusting stagnant water smell. It can be a massive pain. So I'm kind of panicking, looking up the names of local plumbers, cursing the landlady's name all the while for not telling me if there were leaky pipes. It had been raining all day, so it could have easily been something to do with all the rain, but I had an entire 3rd floor above me. How was the roof drainage merging with the vents? And that's when I had my big brain, or not so big brain moment, and realized that it might well be coming from the flat upstairs. Maybe they left the bath running or something. I remember thinking it was annoying, but accidents happen. I run upstairs, knock on the door of the unit directly above me, but get nowhere. Then, making sure no one's around to watch me, I kneel down and put my ear to the keyhole. Decently enough, but try explaining that to some stranger with no context. I expected to maybe hear some running water, maybe even the sound of someone mopping up the overflowed bathwater. But nothing. It's just silence on the other side. Given that I can hardly go kicking the door in, I just go back to my flat, whack a mop bucket under the leak, then get on the phone with the landlady in case she had a plumber on retainer or something. Being the nice lady that she is, my landlady calls me back within minutes to let me know a plumber is on his way. But given that he was already at a job, I'd have to wait about an hour. No big drama. It was a manageable leak, for the time being anyway, but we'd still have to gain entry into the flat upstairs to make sure if it was the source of the whole thing. So I take it upon myself to walk back upstairs every so often to check if someone had returned home. At least, I presume they were out. There was no reason why they wouldn't just answer the door, right? I checked the first time. Then the second was maybe 50 minutes later. Then the third was just shy of 9 at night, like 20:57 on the dot. I remember because it was 15 minutes before the plumber was due to arrive, and I checked the clock just before making one final trip upstairs to check if the neighbors were home. Only when I get to the front door of the flat, which I'm 100% certain had been closed for the previous 2 calls, I can see that it's ever so slightly ajar. I'm certain someone is home by that point, so out of pure politeness, I get to the door a few loud knocks before shouting like, "Hello?" Expecting someone to appear any second, but again, there's no reply. But that time, I can definitely hear the sound of dripping water inside the apartment. So I go ahead and push the door open, seeing that almost the entire carpet is soaking wet. The flat is laid out exactly like mine, so I know the first room I'm going to encounter is the bathroom. The linoleum floor is flooded, the sink is flooded, but the taps are off. There's just a steady drip, drip, drip from one of them, like it hadn't been turned off all the way. When I call out to see if anyone's home, kind of worried I might be seen as rude for just sort of barging in. Yet I'm greeted by complete silence. Just the sound of my own trainer squishing on the sodden carpet as I'm walking through the flat. If you're imagining this as being somewhat of a creepy scene, you'd be dead right. The closer I got to the living room, the more I realized that something might be terribly wrong there. And what do you know? There was. I think I knew she was dead from the moment I laid eyes on her. It was the awkward way she was lying there on the soaking wet floor with her eyelids kind of half closed. It's hard to describe, but I've never seen a person look like that. Like she was frozen in mid-blink or something. I just knew, you know? Like the gut reaction was so intense that I simply didn't need to check the girl's pulse. I didn't need to call out for her to wake up. I mean, I did, just in case. Part of that gut reaction to death was wanting her to wake up. Pretty purely selfish reasons, too, so I'd stop freaking out. But it was no good. She was gone. So I called 999. I tried some CPR and chest compressions as best as I could manage, but nothing would rouse her. It was the single most traumatic experience of my life, just splashing around in the half-flooded flat, begging the poor girl to wake up. All before the moment, I finally just sat on my butt and accepted that she was dead and there was nothing more I could do. I never cried like that before. I'm not ashamed to admit it, and I stayed sat there like that until I saw blue flashing lights in the window. At first, the police were brilliant. They came in my flat with me, made a note of the leak, telling me it was going to be okay and that I did everything right. I just sat there nursing a cup of tea and telling them everything exactly as it happened. I remember touching on the whole fact that the door seemed to have spontaneously opened, meaning that at some point in the time between 2035 and 2057, either the victim or her killer had opened the flat's door for whatever reason. The two policemen shot each other this look that I misinterpreted as like an oof moment in retrospect. I think that was a sign of things to come. They definitely started by treating me like I was the poor innocent member of the public who happened to have stumbled across the tragic death of a young woman. But it didn't take long before they changed their attitude entirely. I got a call from a policeman calling himself D.I. Walker, who politely invited me to the local police station for further questioning. He assured me I wasn't in any trouble. They just wanted to go over a few details with me in light of new evidence that had emerged. It was an informal chat, no need for a solicitor or anything serious like that. So me being an absolute tool, I volunteered to talk to two murder police in an interview room with no one else present. They kept up the good cop routine for a while, going over my statement with me while buttering me up for trying the CPR. But a distinct change of tone came when one of the CID blokes asked me if I'd ever been up to the girl's apartment before the night in question. I told them now that I'd only been there for just over a week when the leak started, and as much as it makes me sound like a bit of a jerk, I'm just not the kind of guy to greet new neighbors with a freaking muffin basket or whatever. Then bizarrely, their follow-up question was if I knew anything about electricals, like if I've ever worked as an electrician or repaired appliances for a living. Again, I told them now, but it was my turn to ask a question. Mainly, why they asked me such an unexpected question. That's when they hit me with the fact that I was basically their number one suspect, and the way the guy said it was honestly horrific. Look mate, the thing is we've come up against a bit of a brick wall here, and we're hoping you can help us out. We started off all friendly like we were old pals or something. You've given a brilliant statement here, and we're really grateful for you going into such detail and giving up your spare time. There's just one big problem. You said you knocked on the flat about 3 times between 8 and 9 o'clock. I wanted about 20 till and once just before 9. We got the time of death as being 8:45 at the very latest. So you're saying you didn't hear anything when you knocked the second time. Well, something is going on in the flat that causes the girl's death. I find that very confusing, don't you? I remember every word that he said, and I knew it wasn't even meant to be accusatory. I don't think, not overtly anyway, but I knew what they were getting at. They had to eliminate me as a suspect, but unfortunately for me, that was much easier said than done, because my fingerprints were everywhere, my clothes fibers were everywhere, and there wasn't a single witness of anyone else having visited that girl's flat that day. No one but me, by my own admission. It started to become obvious that the police actually had a suspect in mind, and it was me. Although I was never actually arrested in the weeks that followed, I had my flat searched twice, and police were almost constantly hanging around the building both flats were in. I noticed that they seemed to take particular interest in the building's wiring, and once or twice they seemed to be accompanied by some kind of tradesman, I'm guessing an electrician. And that's about the time I pieced together that the police thought the girl had died in some kind of freak electrical accident. Maybe a current had run through the flooding and just zapped it right there. But wouldn't that mean that I'd get electrocuted too? But that's just it. Despite the police refusing to tell me much about the investigation, I'm pretty sure they theorized that I'd somehow killed the girl using a jolt of electricity, which in my book showed how stumped they were for a legit theory. Don't get me wrong, the prospect of being the main suspect in the murder, getting a wrongful conviction or something, that's a terrifying thing for sure. But like I mentioned, I was never arrested, and after a while, the whole thing just went away. Naturally, I wanted to know everything the police knew concerning my neighbor's death. But after basically being accused of murder by one of them at one point, I wasn't all that keen on drawing any more attention to myself. What's clear is that I was just meters away from a murder I had no idea was happening, and that I'd only just missed whoever the killer was when they slipped out of the apartment and left the door open. But why would they leave the door open? I couldn't have known that there was a leak, so why not just close the door and roll out the possibility of someone stumbling across the murder scene? And what was the point of flooding the flat in the first place? It wasn't just the bathroom sink. The kitchen sink was overflowing too, but why? On top of that, I don't get the whole electrocution angle either. It seems like such an elaborate way to kill someone, flooding the apartment and then running a strong enough current through the water. And how would a person go about doing that remotely? Because they'd have to. Otherwise, they'd be killed too. Which leads me back to the question of who opened the door then? Was it some elaborate way of taking her own life and she wanted someone to find her before she went rotten? Too many questions. So are you all starting to understand why I spent an awful lot of time just staring at my ceiling? Now I can't seem to shake all the questions that have arisen since I moved in here. And what's worse, I'm kind of stuck here. Yeah, it's a nice place, but Jesus, it's tainted now. And it's going to take a long time before I'm going to feel normal again here. It's not like I have the money for a new deposit, and finding a place I actually like is tough going. And that's the gist of it, I suppose. I've been living under what feels like a tomb, and the mysteries of my neighbor's death have been keeping me up at night for freaking months now. I'd been very interested to hear other people's theories on this because, much like the police seem to be, I'm completely flummoxed as to what the explanation is. I mean, it's probably something perfectly rational, something tedious but tragic. But then again, sometimes my imagination starts taking over, and I start thinking that something entirely more sinister is to blame.
I took a third job delivering pizzas in New York when I was 25. I had an order in one of these big fancy condominiums downtown. When you have to deliver something in these places, you have to tell the reception the address and confirm it with the resident, and then you can deliver the order. When I was clear, I started heading upstairs when this young guy sauntered up to the front desk and caroused around the lobby. This was a Friday evening, and the lobby was abuzz from the people waiting for a night in the town. This guy was in business casual, and the only thing that made him stand apart was that he was wearing those gaudy visors, the one that those frat guys wore. He jokingly says, "Hey, that's my pizza. I will take it." To which I replied, "Fuck off, pal." I had heard this joke before, and it was especially common in business lobbies like this. That was probably the end of it, and I thought I would never see him again. But the tone of my voice, or the face with which I said it, seemed to have struck a nerve for him. As I was about to enter the elevator, he came up to me and said, "You think you can talk to me like that? Do you know who I am? Is this still a joke? What's going on here?" I still have several pizzas in my car, to which if I don't get in 5 minutes after delivering the pizza in the mall parking lot, the valet will have my car towed. I decided to ignore him, but he kept on talking and saying what he does to people like me, and followed me into the elevator crowded with other tenants. I thought this would make him shut up, but he became more agitated and said, "I know what kind of person you are." His eyes gleamed with hatred. He thrust his face in front of me, and I got the first clear look of his face. He was handsome, brown hair, blue eyes, and really white young guy. The crowd of tenants understood he wasn't joking when he said that he could have me killed. He could do it himself too if he wanted. I told him that if he kept this up, I would call the authorities. My stop was on the first floor. He and I were the only ones to get off on that floor. I started looking for the apartment that I had to deliver to, and that guy kept following me saying stuff like that. He hated me and I was a cunt and all that stuff. I knock on the door and a middle-aged man opens the door, and I give him the pizza and the bill, and he pays me and motions towards the crazy guy asking if he will deliver with my friends. I said that I had never met him before and he was following me, and he may have been living in this building, to which the crazy guy said that he lived in that building and I was the one who shouldn't fucking be there. The guy with the pizza told him that he was harassing me and I was just doing my job. I thanked him and started walking back to the elevator, and now there was only one other guy in the elevator. To smooth things out, I asked him where he worked, as he was a good-looking young man, and he said that he worked at the Merc, the New York Mercantile Exchange, and I saw him on the busy trading force, shouting and signaling about commodities and features flashed in my head. It made sense now. When we reached the lobby, I walked out and he stayed in the elevator, presumably to go to his apartment. When I walked out to the street, I asked the other guy who was with us in the elevator. Typical Wall Street behavior, huh? Sure enough, he says.
This was a few years ago, just after I'd left college. I'd been working at Walmart for a while before moving to the customer service counter. My first holiday season was almost my last. After experiencing the post-Christmas returns period, I threatened to quit if my boss didn't move me out. Thankfully, she relented and I was given my own department. That's where I would stay until the next year's returns rush. I was doing my regular thing in electronics when my boss came to me for a favor. One of the girls scheduled to work customer service had just quit on the spot. She couldn't spare anyone else, and she knew I'd worked there before. I told her no before she could even finish, but she continued to beg. As one last desperate move, she offered to give me New Year's Eve and day off. It was an offer too good to refuse, and I reluctantly agreed. In spite of the desk being backed up to the doors, my fellow coworker and I were blowing through the line fast. People seemed to be a bit nicer than they had the previous year. That was until I began assisting this unkempt-looking man. He had a car seat for a toddler that he wanted to return. The guy seemed a little out of it. I had asked him twice about the receipt before he pulled this crumpled piece of paper from his pocket and handed it to me. I unfolded it and began the refund process. As I took the seat from the counter and sat it in a nearby basket, I made a passing comment to a coworker about the guy returning it because he needed to get high. It was just something that I expected from the area, something to that effect. I know it was in bad taste, but my coworker laughed and I returned to the counter to give the guy his money. He was staring a hole through me and gritting his teeth. He said, "I heard that. I'd watch your back if I were you." I could tell he meant business. I didn't want to draw attention, so I apologized under my breath and quickly handed him his money. Before he was able to say anything else, I called for the next customer. He reluctantly stepped away but remained close by, continuing to give me a death stare for several minutes. There was something about the look that terrified me. Although I kept working, a feeling of nausea boiled in my guts until he finally left. The next 3 hours dragged by, and because of the incident, my mood had taken a drastic downturn. I was overjoyed to see it end, but terrified of what may await me outside. There was no way I was going to my car alone. I went to seek out a coworker that I'd been dating on and off for a while. He agreed to walk me out to my car, and we stopped just inside the doors to look out. I didn't see the guy, so we continued on. The two of us stopped again briefly, but there was still no sign of him anywhere. Customers were coming and going, driving by us. Nothing looked off, and we headed across the lot to my car. I was relieved and beginning to think that I had just been overreacting. I knew it was a stupid thing to say, but I didn't know what the outcome would be. Then a car came out of nowhere and began racing up from behind us. The headlights were blinding, and I just began to panic and I froze. And if it wasn't for my companion, I may have been run down. He pushed me between two cars, following close behind. As the car sped by, the driver hurled a disgusting name at me and disappeared onto the access road. I thanked my hero and slowly got back to my feet. He insisted that we call the cops, but I refused. As stupid as it may sound, I was afraid involving them could cost me my job. But allow me to explain. I've been chewed out for being rude to customers before. I would have to explain why the man was so angry to me. If my boss heard what I'd said, I'd definitely lose my promised 2 days off and probably be fired. Rightfully so, I guess. Of course, I could lie and play dumb, but that never works out in the end. I decided to wager on the chance that he was done with me and would move on. And that turned out to be the case, fortunately. Various coworkers continued to walk me to my car after that shift. 2 months passed before I figured I was safe and returned to going solo. To this day, I've not seen that man again and hope never to. Whether I just got lucky or he never intended to kill me, I'll likely never know. Either way, I'm just happy to be alive. My attitude towards strangers changed after that incident, and for the remainder of my time working directly with customers, I made a concerted effort to treat them with respect. I suggest you take this story to heart. We may all have our little episodes of disrespect when dealing with our fellow person. Nobody's perfect. I'm definitely not. But keep in mind, however, you never really know what a stranger is capable of. One arrogant little slip could cost you your life.